Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
Night had fallen over Briarwood, a small town where legends slithered through the whispers of the wind and mystery clung to every cobblestone. In a rundown corner of the town stood a house with peeling paint and creaking timbers, infamous for the inexplicable events that had terrorized generations. It was here, beneath the watchful eyes of a full blood-red moon, that Eveline arrived, determined to unearth the truth behind the stories that had turned innocent children's bedtime tales into nightmares. Eveline's arrival at the dilapidated mansion was not by chance. For months, she had combed through archives, interviewed reluctant locals, and pored over faded diaries describing the unexplained and inexplicable. Her literature teacher had once ridiculed the notion of true scary stories with a scoff, but Eveline refused to let doubt overshadow her resolve. Real terror dwells where truth is left unspoken, she murmured to herself as the forest around the mansion sighed in an eerie chorus of rustling leaves and creaking branches. The door to the house hung slightly ajar, as though beckoning her inward. With a blend of trepidation and resolve, Eveline stepped into the lobby. The stale air was thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. Her footsteps echoed on the warped hardwood floor. Each creak and groan of the old house sent chills cascading down her spine. It was as if the very walls whispered the regrets of the past. A heavy silence enveloped the space, punctuated only by the occasional drip of water from a long-forgotten leak. With trembling hands, she fumbled for her flashlight before pressing on. The beam danced across faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. In one frame, a solemn woman held a small child, her expression half sorrowful, half fearful, a silent testament to a grief that defied time. The house had been left untouched for decades, yet it pulsed with an unnerving vitality, a darkness eager to reveal its secrets. As Eveline navigated through the corridor, she encountered a door marked Study with faded gold lettering. She opened it, revealing rows of ancient books, their spines cracked and titles nearly illegible. On a desk lay a diary, its pages yellowed by the relentless passage of time. The entries were written by a man named Jonathan Crane. His handwriting spilt secrets and confessions, recounted in a hurried scrawl that trembled on the page. Jonathan had been the owner of the mansion, and his words outlined an existence haunted by guilt, madness, and ghostly apparitions. "Tonight, I have seen her again," the entry began, each word pressed with terror. "She stands at the edge of my sorrow, draped in moonlight, her eyes void of life, beckoning me to follow her into the shadowed abyss." Eveline shuddered. The parallels between Jonathan's tale and the local lore were chilling. Every townsperson warned that to invoke the mansion's legacy was to invite a descent into madness. Yet Eveline, driven by a hunger for truth, scribbled notes in her journal, determined to piece together the labyrinth of horror that bound the mansion to Briarwood's dark reputation. A sudden noise shattered the silence. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper echoed through the hallway. "Leave," it breathed, carried by a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. Eveline's heart hammered in her chest as she spun around, trying to locate its source. "Who's there?" she called, her voice quivering. The only response was a lingering echo that faded into the oppressive quiet. For one lingering moment, she thought she saw a shadow dart across the wall, its form indistinguishable and eerily fluid. Unable to resist the pull of a mystery that felt all too real, Eveline continued her exploration. She climbed a narrow staircase leading to the upper floor where the portraits were even more numerous, each one a record of forgotten lives and secrets unsaid. Along one corridor, a solitary door stood closed. She opened it slowly, revealing a room that appeared to be a child's bedroom, preserved in the throes of a bygone era. Toys lay scattered across the floor, and a single rocking horse moved imperceptibly as though stirred by an unseen presence. Suddenly, a low, guttural chuckle reverberated behind her. "You should not be here," a disembodied voice intoned, its tone both mocking and mournful. Spinning around, Eveline saw nothing but the dark silhouette of the door behind her. Her courage warred with terror, yet curiosity forced her onward. "I'm only here for the truth," she whispered, more to herself than to the unseen speaker. The truth is all that matters. Her words seemed to ignite something within the stagnant air. The temperature dropped abruptly, and shadows deepened, coalescing into forms that defied explanation. A figure began to materialize, a woman, pale as marble and clad in a tattered nightgown, her eyes reflecting centuries of despair. "Do you seek the truth, or do you harbor a desire for doom?" The specter asked, her voice trembling with both sorrow and wrath. Eveline's blood ran cold, but she managed to steady herself. "I seek to understand," she replied softly, though her voice wavered. "What happened here? Who are you?" The ghost's gaze pierced her, and with a spectral sigh, the apparition slowly recounted her tragic tale. "I am Miriam," she began, her voice echoing in the forlorn room. "I was once the beloved daughter of Jonathan Crane, but my life was beset by cruel fate and unspeakable truths. My father's obsession with the occult, his desperate desire to commune with the dead, it all led to ruin and despair. I was a victim, caught in the web of his cursed ambition. And I, like many before me, was doomed to linger in the shadows, a prisoner of regret and eternal mourning." Tears welled in Eveline's eyes as she listened, the spectral narrative unveiling layers of horror intertwined with genuine human tragedy. "But why are you still here?" she inquired with trembling earnestness. "Is there a way to lay these spirits to rest?" Miriam's ghost shook her head slowly, her expression resigned. "It is not so simple. The darkness we are entangled with runs deep in the roots of this house and in the hearts of those who dwell in Briarwood. Many souls are intertwined. Mothers, children, lovers, all victims of a relentless curse spawned by forbidden experiments and desperate bargains. I cannot depart until the injustice that binds me is acknowledged, until the tale is told in truth." Feeling the weight of the spectral woman's sorrow, Eveline vowed silently, "I will tell your story, Miriam. Every truth, every secret, even the ones that shatter our minds. You deserve to be remembered, not as a ghost of regret, but as a person who suffered in silence." Miriam's form shimmered, the edges of her spirit blurring. "Beware," she intoned, her voice trailing off like a lament. "For truth is a double-edged sword that often cuts deeper than deception." As the ghost faded into the shadows of the room, Eveline felt both a surge of purpose and an undercurrent of dread. The mansion itself seemed alive, as though it were an ancient guardian of the secrets trapped within. Each creak of its boards, each sigh of its winded corridors whispered of tragedy, betrayal, and the inexorable pull of a past that refused to be silenced. Determined to honor her promise, Eveline combed through every room, discovering fragments of conversations and half-forgotten memories. In the library, she found a collection of letters exchanged between Jonathan and a mysterious figure simply known as Elias. Their correspondence was fraught with foreboding declarations and pleas for mercy. One letter in particular caught her eye. "Elias, I have ventured too far this time, delving into realms beyond mortal ken. The voices in the shadows grow louder each day, and the cost of my ambition is the torment of my soul. If these words are ever read, know that my actions were driven by despair and a misguided hope of transcending mortality. Forgive me, for I am lost in a labyrinth of my own making." This desperate confession resonated with Eveline. She could not help but wonder if Elias was another victim of Jonathan's dark machinations, a friend, perhaps, who had been ensnared by the same dangerous lure of forbidden knowledge. Yet no further word of Elias emerged from the letters, leaving Eveline with an aching sense of unfinished business. Night deepened into an almost tangible presence, and the mansion's corridors became a labyrinth of shadows and half-heard voices. In the dining hall, a long-forgotten chandelier swayed gently in an unseen breeze, scattering spectral light over a table set for a feast long decayed. It was here that Eveline encountered another presence, a man whose eyes glowed with a spectral fire. His voice was both seductive and menacing as he spoke. "You have awakened a slumbering curse, child. Some truths are best left veiled in darkness. Why disturb the rest of the lost souls?" Eveline's instinct screamed to flee, but her resolve was unwavering. "I need to understand," she insisted, her tone defiant despite the quiver of fear. "Every soul here has a story that deserves to be told. I will not be deterred by your threats." The man's expression twisted into a grimace, and for a moment his form seemed to flicker between man and beast, a reflection of the inner torment that had transformed him. "Then you shall see the price of your inquiry," he whispered ominously, before dissipating into the gloom. leaving behind an oppressive silence that pressed in on her. In that harrowing moment, Eveline recognized that the mansion was not merely a repository of old sorrows, but a battleground where the remnants of guilt, pain, and the unchecked thirst for forbidden power clashed violently. In each room, echoes of desperate pleas and anguished cries told a tale of lives consumed by obsession. It was as if the very foundation of the house was built upon the shattered dreams and broken promises of generations. As Eveline walked back through the corridors, every step felt weighted with dread. The silence was a living thing, filled with memories that clawed at the edges of reason. Somewhere in the recesses of the manor, an old clock ticked relentlessly, each tick a harsh reminder of time slipping away, a time during which so many souls had met their untimely ends. Her final destination was the attic, a place rumored to contain the darkest secrets of the Crane family. The attic door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a space cluttered with relics of a forgotten era, broken toys, antique trunks, and disintegrating photographs of somber faces. In the midst of this desolation stood an iron-bound chest, its surface etched with symbols that radiated a menacing aura. Inside the chest lay a collection of relics, a faded wedding dress, letters bound with brittle twine, and a music box that played a haunting melody. Eveline delicately lifted the music box, and as the tune began, the notes resonated with a spectral clarity. The melody carried whispers of lost hope, each note a lament for a destiny unfulfilled. With every turn of the key, the room filled with a sense of desperate longing, a longing that transcended time and defied the constraints of death. In that moment, the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, and Eveline felt her own heartbeat synchronize with the sorrowful cadence of the box. A sudden realization gripped her. Every artifact, every whispered confession was interwoven in a tapestry of despair that encapsulated the horror of what once was and what might still be. The mansion, with all its grotesque beauty and chilling secrets, was a monument to a truth too monstrous to ignore, that beneath the veneer of memory and history lay a darkness that was both eternal and insatiable. In the stillness of the attic, Eveline heard a whisper that was closer than any before. "Don't let it out," it cautioned, a shiver running down her spine. The voice was neither male nor female, ancient yet youthful, a reminder that some evils transcend human experience. Eveline's hand trembled, but she pressed on, speaking softly into the oppressive gloom. "What do you mean? What should I not let out?" The attic itself seemed to answer, the air thickening with the sorrow of lost time. "The truth," the voice repeated, "is a living nightmare that feeds on the fear of those who dare to uncover it. In sharing our stories, you risk unleashing the dormant fury of a past that never found peace." For a long, agonizing moment, Eveline stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee and the responsibility to honor the lost souls by revealing their stories. Finally, with a resolve born of compassion and a need for closure, she whispered, "I promise I will handle it with care. I will let the truth rest only when it has healed the wounds of this place." That promise, however, did not ease the mounting tension. As she made her way out of the attic, the sounds of the mansion grew louder, a cacophony of creaks, whispers, and the soft, sorrowful humming of a lullaby that once lulled a child to sleep. Each sound was a reminder that the past was not buried but prowling the corridors, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim what was once lost. Outside, the bitter wind of the night greeted her as she stepped into the overgrown garden. The estate loomed behind her like a carcass, its ruined facade illuminated by the erratic flicker of her flashlight. Eveline paused, her breath visible in the cold night air, and took a moment to compose herself. The night itself seemed alive with secrets. Whispers in the rustling leaves, the mournful cry of an owl, and the distant lowing of cattle that suddenly sounded ghostly. In the solitude of the garden, Eveline reviewed the fragments of history she had collected. Every faded letter, every whispered account was a piece of a puzzle that painted a chilling mosaic of lives, corrupted by ambition and cursed by regret. It was a story of desperate bargains, of lives sacrificed on the altar of the unknown, and of spirits that roamed unchecked, bound by promises unfulfilled. As dawn began its slow, reluctant crawl across the horizon, Eveline sat on a weathered stone bench, her journal open on her lap. With the sky turning a bruise of purple and pink, she committed every detail to paper. A narrative of pain, hope, and the enduring legacy of those long forsaken. The The mansion, even as it decayed in the twilight, seemed to let out one final, mournful sigh, a sound that echoed the lament of centuries. And so, with a heavy heart and trembling resolve, Eveline prepared to share this harrowing chronicle with the world. For in every corner of Briarwood, in whispered warnings and faded memories, the truth awaited recognition. It was a truth so profound and terrifying that to ignore it was to risk repeating a cycle of unending sorrow. The children who huddled close at bedtime, the elders who warned of restless spirits, and the misfits who dared to challenge tradition, all deserved to know that their nightmares were not mere fictions, but echoes of history, a history that cried out from the shadows for redemption. Even as the first light of day broke through the gloom, a lingering dread remained, a reminder that some horrors do not die with the rising sun. The mansion, with its secrets and specters, would forever be etched into the annals of Briarwood, its legacy an enduring testament to the thin veil between the living and the dead. Eveline's footsteps echoed on the dew-laden grass as she set off down the winding path away from the cursed estate. Her resolve hardened with every step, for she knew that unveiling the truth would not rid the world of its nightmares. It would only transform them into a saga of courage and remembrance. And as she disappeared into the awakening day, the mansion's windows flickered with a ghostly light, as though its long-silenced voices were cheering on a truth finally given voice. In the depths of night's darkest hours, where fear lurks in every corner and secrets slither through the silence, the story of Briarwood would live on, a somber tale of horror and the relentless power of the human spirit to seek what must be known, even at the cost of its own peace. True terror, Eveline realized, was not in the monsters that haunted the dark, but in the unbearable burden of unspoken truths that clawed their way out of the abyss of memory.
Story number 2.
The night lay heavy over the forgotten town of Hollow's Edge, an isolated community where every whisper of wind carried tales of madness and despair. In the midst of a barren landscape stood an abandoned railway depot, its peeling paint and rusting metal a testament to years of neglect. No one in town dared approach it after sundown, for it was said that the depot had once borne witness to unspeakable horrors. Tonight, however, a lone figure, Marcus Quinn, pressed forward into that dark and desolate place, determined to confront the truth behind the legends that had long haunted his childhood. Marcus had grown up hearing the chilling accounts of the depot. Neighbors recounted the eerie sounds of footsteps echoing in the dead of night, of flickering lights dancing in windows long shuttered and empty, and of a mournful sound, a sorrowful whistle that cut through the silence like a knife. What unsettled him most were the stories of people vanishing without a trace, swallowed by the darkness that seemed to seep from the building's very walls. As a hardened journalist with a penchant for the macabre, Marcus believed that beneath these whispered rumors lay a kernel of truth waiting to be unearthed. Armed with a notebook, a digital recorder, and a steadfast resolve, he stepped into the depot under a sky broken by ragged clouds and a waning moon. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp decay and rust, the dim glow of his flashlight carving uneasy shapes upon stained walls. The vast open space of the depot yawned before him, its high ceiling lost to shadows, and rows of decrepit benches lined its length like grim sentinels of memory. His footsteps echoed, each sound resonating with a life of its own, as if the building was mourning its long-forgotten past. Every creak of wood and clang of metal heightened his senses, dredging up memories of obscure nightmares that he'd long tried to forget. Marcus's exploration led him to an old ticket office, its glass shattered and counters draped in remnants of faded posters. Behind the counter on a dusty shelf lay a stack of yellowed papers and a battered diary bound in cracked leather. The diary, penned by a man named Arthur Beecham, detailed a descent into madness that mirrored the grotesque events whispered through the town's memory. Arthur wrote of premonitions, of voices in the darkness urging him toward acts of unspeakable cruelty. His final entry, scrawled hastily, read simply, "They come with the whistle. I must run before they come for me." Marcus felt a chill crawl down his spine as he realized that Arthur's terror was not confined to the pages of the diary. It was a harbinger of what might still be lurking within these walls. As he left the ticket office, a low, spectral whistle pierced the stagnant air, a sound so mournful and eerie that it halted Marcus in his tracks. The sound was not mechanical. yet it mimicked the forlorn call of a lost train, its tune distorted and laden with desperation. "Hello?" Marcus called into the darkness, his voice betraying both curiosity and dread. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that presses in from all sides and makes every heartbeat throb in your ears. Then a faint reply drifted through the air as if carried on a ghostly breeze. "Don't follow." Marcus's instincts warred between fleeing and recording every moment of this inexplicable encounter. He gripped his recorder tightly, whispering, "Who are you? Show yourself." But the sound ceased, leaving only the echo of his words merging with the still, unyielding silence of the depot. Shaken, yet undeterred, Marcus ventured deeper into the maze of forgotten rooms and shadowed corridors. He discovered a narrow staircase leading to a catacomb-like basement, a place rumored to have once served as a storage area and perhaps a clandestine meeting spot for secret societies obsessed with the occult. The stairs creaked ominously with each step, and as he descended, the palpable weight of dread grew heavier, as though the atmosphere itself were burdened by the sins of the past. In the bowels of the depot, the air was colder, and the thin beams of his flashlight illuminated walls covered in cryptic symbols and faded scribbles that told of arcane rites. Marcus's heart pounded as he came upon a heavy iron door, its surface scarred with strange, almost ritualistic carvings. With a trembling hand, he pushed it open, revealing a chamber that exuded an otherworldly chill. Here, scattered about in disarray, were relics. A shattered porcelain doll with staring eyes, weathered photographs of grim-faced men and women, and an assortment of strange talismans whose origins he could only guess lay in forgotten lore. At the center of the room stood a solitary figure, hunched over a makeshift altar. The figure's back was turned, and it was clothed in ragged garments that seemed to merge with the darkness. Marcus's voice faltered as he called out, "Who's there?" The figure slowly turned, revealing an emaciated face with eyes sunken deep into its sockets, yet burning with an eerie intensity. The creature's voice was a low rasp, laden with bitterness and regret. "You should not have come," it warned in a tone that resonated with the finality of a death knell. The figure introduced itself as Samuel, a man trapped by a curse that had seized his soul decades ago. Samuel had been a caretaker of the depot, a guardian of secrets and relics born from unspeakable rituals performed in defiance of nature's laws. He recounted, in a voice trembling with both sorrow and fury, that the depot had been a site of morbid experiments during the dark days of war, a place where desperate men turned to forbidden arts to communicate with entities beyond mortal ken. Their intent had been to harness power, to defy the inevitability of death, but the ritual had twisted their souls into something monstrous. "We called them whispers, but they were truly our undoing," Samuel murmured, his eyes glistening with haunted memories. Marcus, his recorder still clutched in a tight grip, pressed for answers. "What do you mean by whispers? What horrors transpired here?" Samuel's face contorted with anguish as he described the ghastly aftermath. Restless spirits that haunted the walls, the constant sound of a spectral whistle that signaled the approach of nightmarish abominations, and the gradual dissolution of humanity in the wake of a curse that refused to be abated. The darkness, he explained, was not merely an absence of light, but an insidious force that festered where hope had long been forgotten, a force that continued to claim lives long after the final ritual was uttered. Before Marcus could inquire further, the chamber's oppressive ambiance was shattered by a series of frantic knocks from above. Samuel's voice fell into a grave whisper. "They are coming." In that instant, the shadows seemed to swell, converging with a palpable intent. Marcus heard the unmistakable rhythm of heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching from the corridor beyond, a sound that spoke of relentless pursuit and ancient vengeance. Samuel's eyes widened in terror as he stepped back into the darkness, vanishing behind a wall of swirling blackness. "Run while you can," he implored, his words trailing off into the oppressive gloom. Marcus's pulse thundered as he scrambled up the narrow stairs, each step a battle against the surging tide of fear. The echoing knocks grew louder, punctuated by a cacophony of unnatural moans that resonated through the depot like the wail of countless lost souls. As he reached the main hall, he stumbled upon a scene of chaos, a spectral assembly of figures, their forms insubstantial yet undeniably menacing, had materialized in the corridors. They drifted silently, their eyes empty voids that seemed to search for redemption or revenge. Among them, the mournful whistle persisted, echoing as a dirge that heralded doom. Marcus's mind raced with terror as he sought an escape route, but the layout of the depot twisted into an inexplicable labyrinth. Corridors stretched into infinity, lined with doors that led to rooms filled with disjointed memories and haunting visions. A mother clutching a lost child, a soldier in tattered uniform whispering futile prayers, a teacher whose eyes brimmed with unspoken tragedy. The ghosts of those who had suffered in this cursed place moved with a synchronicity that defied reason. In their silent procession, a mournful ballet of despair. In the midst of this otherworldly chaos, Marcus encountered a particularly striking figure, a young woman with long dark hair and eyes that shimmered with a sorrow beyond her years. Clutching a withered bouquet of wilted roses, she spoke softly, her voice barely audible over the dissonant symphony of spectral lamentations. "They are bound by a promise," she said, her tone laced with quiet resignation. "A promise to never let the truth be forgotten, even if it damned us all." Marcus's journalistic instincts demanded answers even as his heart pounded with terror. "What truth? Whose promise?" he asked, trying to steady his shaking hands. "I must tell your story," he insisted, desperate to document every detail of this living nightmare. Her eyes, pools of centuries-old grief, flickered with determination as she replied, "The truth of our suffering, the punishment for the unholy pact made in a time when death was but a prelude to eternal power. The ritual was performed here in these very halls, and its consequences can never be undone." As she spoke, faint images coalesced around them. The ghostly reenactment of a ritual under a stormy sky, men and women bound by ritualistic scars, an altar stained with the blood of hope and despair. The spectral assembly around them began to murmur, a low choral lament that rose and fell in waves like a dark tide. The whistling sound intensified, echoing as if it were the pulse of the very building. It was then that Marcus recognized the true horror. The spirits were not simply trapped in the depot. They were waging a silent war against the forces that had condemned them. Each figure, each anguished voice was a testament to the lives torn asunder by a forbidden transgression, a pact forged in desperation, sealed with blood and eternal remorse. As the spectral congregation edged closer, Marcus's only thought was survival. He bolted for what he believed was the exit, his every step haunted by the ghostly chorus behind him. The corridors twisted and merged into an inescapable maze. Doors slammed shut, trapping him in narrow hallways that seemed to pulse with malice. The world around him blurred into a nightmarish vision of overlapping realities, a melange of brutal past and a foreboding future where death was not the end, but a gateway to further torment. In the midst of his flight, Marcus reached a grand archway that led into a vast, crumbling atrium. Here, in the cold light of a broken stained glass window, he paused to catch his breath. His recorder, now forgotten in his frantic escape, lay silent on a dusty bench. His mind reeled with fragmented images and half-remembered whispers of despair. The atrium's silence was oppressive, filled with a palpable expectancy, as though the building itself were holding its breath. A sudden gust of wind stirred the dust in swirling patterns, and from the center of the atrium emerged a figure that commanded both fear and curiosity. Dressed in antiquated clothing and carrying an aura of dignified sorrow, the figure spoke in a measured, haunting tone. "You have come far, seeker of truth," he intoned, his eyes reflecting both wisdom and the weight of millennia. "But be warned, the journey you have embarked upon bears consequences that stretch far beyond mortal reckoning. The truth you seek is not merely a tale to be told, it is a burden to be carried, a curse to be borne by those who dare to unearth it." Marcus, his voice trembling with both defiance and trepidation, asked, "Who are you? Why must this truth be hidden in shadows?" The dignified stranger's gaze deepened and he replied, "I am Alistair, a keeper of memories and guardian of the covenant. In ages past, we made a pact, a desperate plea to defy death itself, which came at a price too terrible to be borne by the living. The souls of those who partook in that dark rite are forever entwined with these walls. Their suffering, their unavenged cries that continue to echo in endless torment until the wound is healed by acknowledgement and absolution." Alistair's words resonated within the hollow atrium, casting ripples that seemed to momentarily still the night. "If you wish to leave this place unscathed," he continued, You must confront the ordeal of truth. Only by bearing witness to our collective agony can you hope to release the binding curse that condemns us all. Torn between his instinct for self-preservation and his duty to document the hidden horrors, Marcus hesitated, his heart pounding with conflicting emotion. The spectral figures encircling him stirred restlessly. I must tell your story, he stammered, for if the world never knows, then these souls remain cursed to eternal silence. Alistair regarded him solemnly. Very well, he pronounced. But know this, the narrative you choose to share will forever alter your destiny. When the truth is set free, it will reach into the hearts of all who listen, calling forth echoes of pain and redemption alike. As Alistair's words sank in, the atrium shivered with a haunting energy. The spectral figures, once indistinct shadows, now began to reveal their distinct identities. A young mother with tear-streaked cheeks, a stooped old man whispering prayers to the void, a young soldier in tattered uniform looking for a home that no longer existed. Their eyes, laden with sorrow and longing, implored Marcus to bear witness to their plight. In that moment, the horrors of the past coalesced into a singular, overpowering truth, one that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Marcus knew that his every word henceforth would be imbued with the weight of their suffering, an unyielding reminder of the terrible price paid for forbidden power. With shaky resolve, he opened his notebook and began to write. Each word was a lifeline thrown into the churning abyss, an attempt to rescue the lost souls from the shadow of oblivion. The building seemed to respond to his promise, the oppressive darkness easing ever so slightly as if gratified by the act of remembrance. Yet, as the first light of pre-dawn crept through shattered windows, a final, anguished cry shattered the fragile calm, a sound that was both a blessing and a curse. The spectral voices converged one last time, their combined wail a melancholy benediction echoing in the cold corridors of the depot. Marcus, his eyes brimming with tears and his hands stained with the ink of sorrow, felt a strange tranquility settle over him. In that heart-wrenching cry lay the hope of absolution, a promise that even the deepest darkness might one day be illuminated by the truth. As dawn broke over Hollow's Edge, the abandoned depot stood silent and still, a mausoleum of secrets and whispered regrets. Marcus emerged into the pale light of a new day, clutching his notebook and recorder, his heart forever marked by the toll of truth. The voices of the past, once caged in sorrow, now echoed faintly on the wind, a somber reminder that some tales must be told, no matter the price. And so, with every step he took away from that accursed place, Marcus carried with him not only a story of horror and despair, but also the profound realization that the act of remembrance itself is a powerful force, a light in the perpetual darkness where our most terrible truths reside.
Story number 3.
The relentless drumming of rain against the window panes of the decrepit roadside motel created a macabre symphony that accompanied Elaine's troubled thoughts as she drove along the deserted highway. The night was inky and deep, a darkness so profound it seemed to devour the moonlight and stifle any hope of escape. After a long day of futile searching for her missing brother, Daniel, Elaine's anxiety and exhaustion urged her to pause at the only available refuge, a crumbling motel that had once been a bustling way station but now lay in ruin, abandoned by time and civilization alike. Elaine parked her car beneath a flickering neon sign that read, "The Halfway Inn," its letters barely visible through the fog of years and neglect. As she stepped from the car, an inexplicable chill raced up her spine. The building's facade was a patchwork of peeling paint and rusted metal, its windows dark and lifeless. A solitary light burned within the lobby, a solitary flame that beckoned her inward despite the gnawing dread in her heart. Inside, the lobby was a time capsule of grim memories. Patterned wallpaper, faded to a sickly hue, broken mirrors that distorted reflections into monstrous shapes, and a reception desk engraved with the names of past travelers whose whispers seemed to echo through the silence. The air was heavy with the tang of mildew and despair. A weary man behind the desk, with sunken eyes and hollow cheeks, greeted her with a raspy voice. "Room 7. It's the only vacancy." His tone, as if rehearsed by sorrow itself, gave Elaine pause, but hunger for shelter overrode her better judgment. The room, located in a narrow corridor at the end of the hall, was dimly lit by a single cracked lamp. The bed, with its threadbare blanket, appeared to be the only refuge against the cruelty of the night. Yet, as Elaine settled in, uneasy thoughts began to take root. She had heard rumors, scattered whispers along lonely highways, of inexplicable sounds and fleeting shadows haunting rooms like hers. But with the storm raging outside and memories of Daniel urging her onward, Elaine had no choice but to dismiss these superstitions as mere figments of an overactive imagination. Late that night, as a gust of wind rattled the window and the ancient building groaned under the weight of its own history, Elaine lay awake in her creaking bed. Sleep was a distant promise when the silence itself turned ominous. In the corner of the room, a tall, narrow wardrobe stood as a silent sentinel. Its darkened surface seemed to absorb every stray beam of light, creating an unsettling void. At first, she convinced herself it was merely the product of her fatigue. But then she heard it, a quiet, deliberate creak, as if a door were being opened somewhere in that darkness. "Hello?" she called softly, voice trembling in the oppressive stillness. There was no answer, only the persistent, almost rhythmic sound of that wooden hinge. Gathering her courage, Elaine rose from the bed, clutching a small lamp as her feeble source of light, and approached the wardrobe. The air grew inexplicably colder as her hand reached for the aged brass knob. With one final deep breath, she pulled the door open. Inside, the wardrobe was empty, save for a scattering of moth-eaten clothes and a single faded photograph propped against a dried bouquet. The image depicted a family, a smiling couple and a little boy whose eyes, despite being captured on paper decades ago, glinted with an uncanny, knowing sadness. Elaine's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind churned with questions. Who were they? Had they once called this place home? Even more unsettling, why did a sense of loss and sorrow permeate the very air of the room? That night, as the hours bled away into the indistinguishable darkness, Elaine's restless slumber was invaded by a series of dreams so vivid and grotesque they left her gasping for breath. In her nightmare, a gaunt figure in tattered clothing appeared at the foot of her bed. His eyes, deep pools of despair, locked with hers as he murmured in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of oblivion, "They never left, and neither shall you." Before she could question his words, the figure dissolved into a swirling mist of shadows that coalesced around her, suffocating her with their cold embrace. At the break of a dismal dawn, Elaine awoke, drenched in sweat. The remnants of the nightmare clung to her like a curse, and yet the inexplicable pull of the dream compelled her to search for answers. A trembling resolve took hold of her. She would explore every dark corner of the motel to piece together its tragic secrets in hopes that they might, in some way, lead her to Daniel. Perhaps, she mused, the motel's spectral inhabitants could provide the clues she so desperately sought. Wrapped in a threadbare coat and armed with nothing more than a flashlight and her resolve, Elaine ventured into the deserted halls. The corridors were labyrinthine, their walls marked by deep scratches and red, rusted stains that resembled the remnants of ancient battles. Every footstep echoed into the silence, each sound a testament to the building's unyielding melancholy. At the end of one long corridor, she discovered a narrow door nearly hidden beneath layers of dusty curtains. It was labeled storage in peeling letters that only half conveyed their message. Curiosity overcame caution as Elaine pushed the door open, revealing a cramped room filled with relics from forgotten times. Stacks of yellowed newspapers, rusted suitcases, and tarnished trinkets. In one corner lay an ornate, weathered mirror whose surface shimmered faintly despite the years of neglect. Though its edges were marred by cracks, the reflection it offered was disturbingly clear, a silent witness to the generations of sorrow that had passed before. It was in that reflective glass that Elaine's eyes locked with a gaunt, emaciated figure standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Only the clutter of abandoned memories filled the space. The image in the mirror, however, did not recede. It was as if the mirror's surface was a portal, a window into the tormented soul of someone trapped between life and death. The reflection's eyes, milky and vacant, seemed to plead silently for liberation from a wretched existence. "Find us," the mirror whispered in a voice that was both a command and a dirge. "Free us from this nightmare." Haunted by the mirror's message, Elaine's investigation took on a desperate urgency. She spent hours scouring the decrepit halls and abandoned rooms of the motel, piecing together fragments of a long-buried tragedy. In a dusty filing cabinet tucked away in a forgotten office, she discovered a ledger, a record of guests, some with names that resonated with a somber finality, others with initials that hinted at untold secrets. Among them was the name M. Blackwell. The surname sent a shiver down Elaine's spine. It turned out that the motel had once been a private mansion owned by the reclusive Mortimer Blackwell, a man whose sudden and mysterious disappearance had sparked rumors that his very soul had been ensnared by the building. The ledger continued to reveal unsettling patterns. A series of premature departures, unexplained absences, and guests who had left in a state of abject terror with no explanation. One entry stood out. A note that read, "Heed the whispers, for they are the voices of those who have suffered. They cry out for justice and release." Elaine's mind raced with possibilities. Could Blackwell's dark experiments or twisted family secrets be the root of the motel's sorrow? And could these long-forgotten apparitions somehow be connected to her missing brother? Determined to unearth the truth, Elaine followed the ledger's trail to an imposing door concealed behind a wall panel in the main hallway. With trembling hands, she slid the panel aside to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into a subterranean chamber. The air grew colder still as she descended, the flickering beam of her flashlight dancing over walls etched with cryptic symbols and indecipherable markings. These symbols, she realized with dawning horror, were not mere decoration. They were the language of forbidden rituals, of desperate attempts to capture or exile the evil that dwelled within the building. At the bottom of the staircase, Elaine entered a cavernous room dominated by a massive stone altar. The altar bore the unmistakable scars of violence, deep gouges, burn marks, and scorch marks that appeared to have seared the very fabric of reality. Surrounding the altar were relics of a bygone era, candles in ornate holders that had long since melted into cryptic shapes, and fragments of stained glass that cast eerie, shifting patterns when struck by her light. The oppressive weight of this chamber squeezed the air from her lungs. It was here that the true legacy of Mortimer Blackwell revealed itself. In the center of the altar lay a battered journal, its cover bound in cracked leather and stained with time. Elaine hesitated for only a moment before opening it. The pages, filled with spidery handwriting and desperate annotations, chronicled Blackwell's descent into madness. He had been obsessed with the notion of transcending mortal limitations, to harness a dark force that lay dormant beneath the veneer of civilization. His experiments, however, had exacted a terrible price. The journal detailed unholy ceremonies and forbidden bargains with entities that defied mortal comprehension. Blackwell's final entry was a feverish scrawl. "The whispers have become our eternal torment. I have bound our souls to these walls. They will never rest until the injustice is avenged." The gravity of the revelation left Elaine reeling. The motel was not merely haunted by lost souls. It was a prison, a mausoleum of misery where the tormented were shackled to relics of a failed experiment in immortality. Determined now more than ever to find a link between the cursed past and her missing brother, Elaine whispered to the darkness, "Daniel, if you're out there, please, let me know." At that moment, a subtle shift in the air signaled that she was not alone. The chamber's silence fractured as a quavering voice, soft and mournful, echoed from the far corner of the room. "Release us," it pleaded. Following the sound, Elaine discovered a small, rusted box sealed with a heavy iron clasp. With careful hands, she pried it open to reveal a collection of trinkets, a faded ribbon, a brass key, and an old photograph of a young boy with familiar, gentle eyes, a striking likeness to Daniel. Her heart pounded with a mixture of hope and dread as she clutched the photograph to her chest. Before she could process this revelation, the tormented murmurs in the chamber swelled into anguished wails. Shadows began to coalesce, swirling around her in a maelstrom of despair. From the darkness emerged spectral figures, men, women, and children contorted by grief, their eyes pleading for deliverance. They converged upon Elaine in a surreal dance of agony and fury. Amid their chorus, a single figure detached itself from the mass. A little girl in a tattered dress, her hair matted and eyes shimmering with the innocence of lost dreams. Her voice, fragile yet resolute, reached out to Elaine. "Help us find him," she whispered. "Help bring Daniel home." The realization crashed over Elaine like a tidal wave. The spirits had been bound here by Blackwell's cursed bargains, and among them her brother's presence had lingered all along, a desperate soul caught between the realms of the living and the damned. "Daniel!" Elaine cried out, voice echoing in the cold chamber. I will set you free, I promise. The spectral figures recoiled as if the very sound of his name shattered the bonds of their eternal torment. The apparition of the little girl reached out, her small hand trembling. You must break the seal, she murmured. Find the key to free our souls. And with that, she faded away like mist on a winter morning, leaving Elaine alone with the heavy truth. Determination ignited within her. The brass key from the rusted box must be the instrument to break the unholy link that held these spirits captive. With shaking fingers and unwavering resolve, Elaine retraced her steps up the narrow staircase, the key warm in her hand as if imbued with a desperate, latent hope. She hurried to the entrance of the chamber where she remembered a locked iron door, an entrance said to lead to Blackwell's private study. According to the ledger and journal, it was there that the final ritual had been performed, and it was there that the curse could be undone. Back in the study, Elaine found the heavy door concealed behind a faded tapestry. The brass key fit perfectly into the lock, and with a resounding click, the door swung open to reveal a room frozen in time. Dust motes hung in the stagnant air, illuminated by the pale light filtering through a cracked window. The study was dominated by a vast, imposing desk, atop which lay scattered papers, ritual paraphernalia, and one final, ominous contraption, a locked chest bearing intricate carvings of arcane symbols. This chest, as the journal hinted, was designed to contain the spectral energy summoned by Blackwell. If the curse was to be lifted, the trapped souls had to be given a chance to move on by releasing the curse's hold from within. With a deep, steadying breath, Elaine placed the brass key into the chest's hidden keyhole. The mechanism groaned as ancient locks disengaged. The chest creaked open to reveal a small, ornate vial filled with a shimmering, murky liquid, the embodiment of the curse itself. A voice, soft yet insistent, filled the study. To break the chain, you must pour it where the light of truth touches the darkness of sin. The words were etched into Elaine's memory like a divine command. Clutching the vial, Elaine raced back through the labyrinthine corridors to the cold, desolate atrium outside where the storm still raged like the fury of condemned souls. There, at the base of a weathered stone monument, carved with the names of those who had suffered at the hands of Blackwell, she knew this was the place where the light and darkness met. The monument stood in a clearing behind the motel, a silent guardian of forgotten promises, and a beacon for lost souls. As Elaine stood before the monument, the storm's fury intensified, and spectral voices rose in a final, mournful chorus. With unwavering resolve, she uncorked the vial and poured its contents onto the monument's weathered surface. Immediately, the ground trembled with a force that seemed to split the night in two. The murky liquid sizzled upon contact with the stone, and a blinding light erupted from the base of the monument, washing over the motel and its haunted halls with a cleansing radiance. For a fleeting moment, time stood still. The spectral figures gathered at the periphery of the light, their tortured expressions transforming from anguish to a serene acceptance. One by one, they began to ascend into the luminous void above, a final, bittersweet farewell as they were released from their eternal prison. In the midst of the departing souls, a familiar, tender presence emerged. Elaine's heart leaped as she recognized the gentle smile and warm eyes of Daniel, standing before her like a beacon of hope amidst despair. Elaine, his ghostly voice spoke, soft as a whispered prayer, "Thank you for breaking the curse." There was sorrow in his eyes, mingled with an everlasting peace that surpassed the agony of the past. "I was trapped here, bound by the sins of a man who sought to defy the laws of life and death. Your courage has freed not only me, but all of us condemned to suffering." Tears streamed down Elaine's cheeks as she reached out to him, desperate to bridge the chasm between worlds. For a moment, fatherly pride and sorrow, hope and regret converged in that luminous space between life and death. Daniel's spectral form began to fade like morning dew under the rising sun, yet his presence remained an indelible imprint on her soul. The storm abated, the neon sign of the halfway inn flickered one final time before succumbing to the light of day, and the heavy pall that had hung over the motel was lifted, as if by magic. In the aftermath, Elaine stood silently before the monument, feeling the weight of 1,000 lost souls lift from her shoulders. The motel, once a repository of horrors and despair, now exuded a fragile sense of peace, a peace born of truth, remembrance, and the courage to confront the darkness within. She knew her life would be forever changed by the events of that night, a legacy etched into her heart by the ghosts of the past and the fragile promise of tomorrow. Determined to honor the memory of Daniel and those who had been freed from their torment, Elaine vowed to document the untold horrors of the Halfway Inn and the cursed legacy of Mortimer Blackwell. Every whispered secret and every anguished cry would be preserved so that the world might remember the price of forbidden ambition and the enduring power of hope. In that promise lay the assurance that even the most harrowing nightmares, when confronted by the light of truth, could be exorcised from the corners of our lives. As the first rays of dawn bathed the clearing in a gentle glow, Elaine began to write her account, a narrative of horror and redemption that would serve as both a warning and a memorial. With each word, she felt the spirits drawing further away from their earthly bindings, their final goodbye, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming darkness. In that quiet morning, as nature whispered gentle hymns of renewal, the past was given the dignity of remembrance and the promise of release. Elaine's story would echo far beyond the ruined motel and cursed monument, a reminder that sometimes, to break the chains that bind us, we must confront the deepest horrors of our existence. And as she closed her journal and stepped away from the monument, her eyes glistening with both grief and hope, the lingering voices of the departed faded into a whisper, a final benediction on the wind.
Story number 4.
In the dying glow of twilight, a battered carriage creaked to a halt at the edge of Blackwood Hollow, a small, isolated settlement shrouded in perpetual fog and muttered superstitions. At the carriage's door stood Nora Calder, a determined yet uneasy investigator with a haunted past of her own. Drawn by rumors of eerie disappearances and whispered legends of a cursed asylum deep in the hills, Nora stepped into the forsaken town with trepidation and resolve. Every cobblestone and crooked sign in Blackwood Hollow told a story of sorrow and mystery, a history steeped in grim secrets waiting to be unearthed. The locals eyed her with wary suspicion as she made her way past crumbling stone cottages and gnarled trees that groaned under the weight of time. At a worn tavern where the only light came from a sputtering oil lamp behind grimy windows, Nora inquired about the abandoned asylum. The barkeep, a gaunt man with sorrowful eyes, leaned forward and whispered, "They say the asylum on Blackwood Hill is haunted by the tormented souls of those who were never meant to escape. Enter if you dare, but remember, the past here never really dies." His voice trembled between warning and despair, leaving Nora with a chill that defied the autumn chill in the wind. Determined to see the truth for herself, Nora made her way uphill along a narrow, overgrown path. The fog curled around her ankles like spectral fingers as the asylum's silhouette emerged. A hulking structure of decaying stone and iron, half consumed by ivy and the relentless grip of nature. Its windows were like dark, watchful eyes, and the wrought iron gate, twisted and rusted, bore intricate designs that seemed to writhe in the failing light. A sense of profound isolation and oppressive history weighed on Nora's soul as she crossed the threshold. With nothing more than a flashlight, a battered recorder, and her steadfast determination, she pushed open the creaking door and stepped into the black maw of the asylum. Inside, the corridors stretched out like a labyrinth of despair. The air was thick with dust and the unmistakable scent of decay, permeated by an undercurrent of something unidentifiably foul. Faded murals and peeling wallpaper clung desperately to the walls, and every step echoed in a relentless hollow rhythm that seemed to call out from the depths of endless time. Nora's flashlight beam darted across crumbling relics of a bygone era, old wheelchairs, frayed curtains, and rusted medical tools that glinted with a sinister glimmer in the weak light. Her first stop was an old reception hall where a grand clock hung silent, its gears still frozen at the hour of a tragic past. A dusty ledger lay open on a desk, its pages scrawled with names and dates that hinted at lives abruptly ended. As Nora traced her fingers over the faded ink, a sudden cold draft whisked through the room. She paused, heart pounding, when a disembodied whisper brushed past her ear. "Help us. Freedom. Release." The voice was not that of a man or a woman, but a tortured chorus of both, echoing with the agony of ages. Nora's spine arched as if 1,000 cold needles pricked her skin. She knew then that this place was far more than a relic. It was a mausoleum of souls desperate for deliverance. Venturing further down a narrow corridor lined with cell-like rooms, she came upon one door that seemed different from the rest. Its panel was heavy and adorned with faint, unsettling symbols that she recognized from arcane texts, the marks of forbidden rituals and desperate pleas for mercy. The door creaked open to reveal a small room preserved in a state of forced tranquility. In the center stood an ancient bed draped in a moth-eaten canopy. On the wall hung a stained mirror, its surface clouded yet strangely reflective. As Nora approached the mirror, her reflection dissolved and was replaced by a vision, an image of a gaunt man in a tattered doctor's coat, his eyes sunken and pleading, reaching out as if imploring her to remember. "Dr. Aldrich," a cracked voice murmured from the depths of the mirror. "I was trying to save them, but the darkness consumed my methods." The vision flickered like a dying film, revealing brief glimpses of tormented patients, huddled in the shadows, and horrifying experiments conducted in the name of twisted science. Nora's breath hitched as she realized that the doctor's pleas were not just cries of regret, but desperate warnings. She steadied herself, knowing that the secrets of this place were woven with endless tragedy. Determined to uncover the truth, Nora sought out the asylum's records archive, a room rumored to contain files and journals chronicling the institution's dismal history. Wandering down a forgotten staircase, she entered a vast library-like chamber, its shelves collapsing under the weight of neglected volumes and brittle records. In the dim light, Nora discovered journals bound in cracked leather and stained with time. One leather-bound journal in particular immediately caught her eye. Its cover was embossed with the initials AC in ornate, looping script, the very same initials as Dr. Aldrich. With trembling hands, Nora opened the journal and began reading the anguished entries penned by the doctor himself. Aldrich's words were a torrent of regret and horror. He described the desperate measures taken in an era of hopelessness, attempts to cure mental illness and relieve unbearable pain by tapping into forces beyond mortal understanding. His experiments, performed in secret in the depths of the asylum's underground chambers, involved rituals and incantations that promised salvation, but instead opened a gateway to a void of unspeakable terror. In one entry, he confessed, "I called upon the other side, believing I could harness the power of the lost souls to mend shattered minds. But what came back was not healing. It was a plague of darkness that consumed us all." Before Nora could digest the full extent of these revelations, the silence was shattered by heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor outside the archive. She snapped the journal closed, her pulse racing, and clutched it to her chest. The footsteps grew louder, as if bearing down upon her from a lengthening corridor. "Who's there?" she called, voice quavering in the musty air. The reply was a soft, sorrowful moan, followed by the clicking of metal against stone, a sound reminiscent of chains. Panic surged through her veins, but her determination to uncover the truth overpowered the urge to flee. Gripping the journal tightly, she inched toward the sound, her flashlight beam trembling as she peered around a corner. Before her, in the narrow hallway lit dimly by a flickering sconce, was the spectral form of a young nurse. Her eyes were large and glistening with melancholy, and her uniform was stained with dried blood. "Please, help us," the nurse pleaded, her voice barely audible over the rustle of distant wind. Dr. Aldrich's horror did not end with me. We are trapped here, souls forever bound to these halls by the sins committed under the curse of his ambition. The nurse's spectral form reached out with translucent hands as if begging Nora to witness her eternal suffering. "The door below leads to the heart of our torment, where the final ritual was performed. Only by reliving the pain can you free us." Swallowed by a mixture of dread and compassion, Nora hesitated only a moment before following the ghostly nurse. Together they descended a narrow stairwell into the bowels of the asylum, a subterranean labyrinth where the air was colder still, and the faint echoes of past agony pervaded every corner. The walls, lined with grotesque symbols and smeared with what appeared to be dried blood, whispered secrets of rituals long past. In the center of a cavernous chamber stood an enormous stone structure adorned with carvings of lost souls and anguished faces, a makeshift altar surrounded by crumbling remnants of arcane instruments. Here, the nurse stopped, pointing a trembling, spectral finger at an inscription carved deep into the stone. In his final days, Dr. Aldrich believed that the cure to madness was to merge the living with the dead, a horrific pact with forces beyond our ken, the nurse intoned in a voice both mournful and stern. This altar was the nexus of his sacrifice, the very heart of our eternal prison. His incantations severed the boundary between life and death, and our souls have been ensnared ever since. Nora's mind churned with terror and disbelief. In the center of the altar, she noticed a shallow cavity that contained a small dust-laden phial sealed with a wax emblem, a sigil she recognized from the pages of Aldrich's journal. It was, she believed, the embodiment of the horror he had unleashed. The nurse's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as she implored, "If you can shatter the dark bond, if you can release the souls that suffer, then you must destroy that phial. But be warned, the act will awaken those who remain ensnared, and the final confrontation may demand a sacrifice greater than you can imagine." Nora's heart pounded with both the weight of the decision and the potential for redemption. The quiet intensity in the nurse's spectral gaze left no room for hesitation. She retrieved the phial from the altar, feeling its icy weight in her hand. It seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, as if it were the beating heart of the asylum's malevolence. With a deep, shuddering breath, Nora made her way back to a small antechamber that overlooked the grand hall. There, set against a crumbling wall, hung a shattered portrait of Dr. Aldrich, his eyes stern yet marked with profound sorrow. In that grim reflection, Nora sensed that the weight of the past was not confined to twisted experiments and spectral whispers alone, but was woven into the very fabric of human despair. With the phial clutched tightly, she recited a passage from Aldrich's journal, a plea for absolution that had been scrawled in desperate, quivering script. For every lost soul, let their pain be unbound. For every cry in the darkness, may the light of truth resound. The words, barely more than a whisper, resonated with the stagnant air. The moment the incantation left her lips, the phial shuddered violently. A deep hum, like the roar of 1,000 anguished cries, filled the chamber, and the temperature plummeted. The stone around her began to tremble, as dark shadows congealed in every corner of the hall. From the gloom emerged a figure cloaked in ragged robes, a spectral embodiment of Dr. Aldrich himself. His presence was overwhelming, a collision of paternal regret and monstrous ambition. His eyes, swirling with an unholy mixture of sorrow and fury, locked onto Nora. "You dare break the pact?" he intoned, his voice echoing off the ancient walls with both authority and deep lamentation. "I sought to end suffering, yet I doomed us all to eternal torment. Now you come to shatter what I have wrought, without understanding the full measure of the sacrifice required." His gaze bore into her, questioning her resolve, testing the limits of her will. Nora's voice was small yet determined. "Your vision was twisted by sorrow and desperation. I seek only to free the souls you damn to suffer. They deserve peace, and I will not let your mistakes condemn them forever." The challenge in her tone was unwavering, despite the surging terror that threatened to overwhelm her. As Aldrich's spectral form surged forward, the chamber erupted into chaos. The nurse and other phantasmal figures rallied around Nora, their voices merging into a sorrowful chorus that begged for deliverance. The very walls of the asylum seemed to weep, as if mourning the lost lives and unatoned sins. Shadows danced and warped in the flickering light of Nora's failing flashlight as Aldrich's spirit advanced and the room pulsated with an energy that defied mortal understanding. The phial in Nora's hand glowed with an ethereal luminescence, each flicker a heartbeat of hope against the encroaching darkness. With a final, defiant cry, she hurled the cursed phial at the spectral figure of Aldrich. It shattered on contact, releasing a torrent of mist and light that filled the chamber with a sound like shattering glass and the rustle of ancient pages. The dark energies that had long bound the tortured souls began to unravel, their whispers rising in a crescendo of liberation and regret. Aldrich's form faltered, his once commanding presence now a quivering mass of spectral agony. "No, this cannot be undone," he chanted in a wavering tone, as if caught in the grip of an unstoppable tide. The nurse and the gathered apparitions wailed in unison, a sound both mournful and exultant, while Nora felt the oppressive weight of despair begin to lift like a receding tide. The violent surges of shadow retreated, leaving in their wake a silence that was both profound and sorrowfully tranquil. Slowly, as if the heavens themselves sighed in relief, The tortured spirits began to dissipate. Their forms softened into motes of light before vanishing into the ether, freed from the chains of a nightmarish past. Even Aldrich, with a final anguished expression, dissolved into a stream of shimmering motes that ascended into the darkness beyond. In that silence, Nora stood alone amid the ruins of torment, a solitary figure who had faced the very embodiment of human folly and despair, and against all odds had chosen compassion over fear. In the days that followed, as the first tentative rays of dawn returned to Blackwood Hollow, the asylum was found silent and still, a relic of a bygone era now seemingly at rest. The town's inhabitants, long tormented by the legends of the cursed institution, marveled as the oppressive air lifted and hope crept back into their lives. Nora documented every detail of her harrowing experience, not only as a testament to the dark chapter of Dr. Aldrich's misguided ambition, but also as a tribute to the souls finally released from their eternal purgatory. Yet even as the asylum's haunted corridors grew quiet and nature began to reclaim the forgotten edifice, a lingering echo of sorrow remained. In the quiet moments between night and day, if one listened closely, the wind over Blackwood Hill might still carry faint, distant whispers, a soft reminder that the past, though exorcised from one place, is forever entwined with the human heart and can never be completely forgotten. Nora left Blackwood Hollow with more questions than answers, and a heavy responsibility to share the story of those lost souls who had cried out for salvation. As she drove away along the fog-laden road, the image of the shattered file and the anguished eyes of Dr. Aldrich remained etched in her memory. But with each mile she traveled, there grew a quiet, resolute hope that even the darkest horrors could one day be transformed into a promise of redemption. For in the heart of the forsaken asylum, amid the tortured echoes of the past, a spark of humanity had been rekindled, a light that, no matter how faint, would forever illuminate the enduring truth. That compassion, bravery, and the willingness to confront one's deepest fears have the power to break even the most unyielding chains of despair.
Story number 5.
In the northern woods of Maine, hidden from GPS signals and untouched by modern roads, there's a stretch of forest known to locals only as the Still. It earned the name not for the quiet, but for the unnerving absence of sound. No birds, no crickets, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. The Still is where things go missing. Animals, people, time. You step in and you might come back, but you won't come back right. Miles Kincaid didn't believe in that kind of thing. An ex-forest ranger turned freelance survivalist, he was used to getting called in for strange jobs, search and rescues, backwoods training for rich execs, the occasional ghost hunting expedition for YouTubers. He never believed in the supernatural, until he got a call from a desperate man named Henry Vale. "My daughter went into the woods 3 weeks ago," Henry said, voice shaking. "She went looking for a place locals warned her about. She had a camera, a notebook, the whole urban explorer thing. I found her pack near a creek on the border of the Still." A pause. There were scratches, not animal, long, like fingernails. Against his better judgment and lured by a generous cash offer, Miles agreed to take the job. He packed light, food for 3 days, his GPS, a satellite phone, a .357 revolver, and a GoPro he clipped to his shoulder for documentation. He didn't expect to find the girl. He expected to find her body. But what he found in the Still was something else entirely. The first mile into the woods felt normal. Sunlight filtered through the pines, birds chirped, the air was crisp. But exactly 1.2 miles in, the forest changed. The birds fell silent mid-song like someone had flipped a switch. The wind died. The trees suddenly loomed closer together as if leaning in to listen. Even the air felt different, denser, colder, like walking into an old freezer that hadn't been opened in years. He checked his GPS. The screen was frozen. The compass on his watch spun slowly, never settling. "Okay," he muttered into his recorder. "Just a magnetic anomaly. Could explain some of the rumors." But the deeper he went, the more reality began to warp. It started with the trees. They all leaned away from a central direction, their trunks bending unnaturally, as if trying to escape something. Then came the totems, small piles of rocks wrapped in braided hair, some with teeth jammed between the stones. Miles found the first one at mile 2. By mile 3, he'd counted over a dozen. At mile 4, he found the notebook. It was half buried in moss near a hollow tree. On the first page, the name was clear, Kayla Vale. The entries started out excited, full of the thrill of discovery. But over time, the handwriting grew frantic. The trees don't let me leave. I turned around 3 times and ended up back at the same creek. I haven't heard a single sound in 2 days. I think it's watching me. There's something in the mirror of my camera. It's not me. On the last page was a single line scrawled over and over again in black marker. Don't look for me. Miles pocketed the notebook and pressed forward. He should have left. Every rational part of his brain told him to turn around, but something deeper pulled him. Something colder than logic. Curiosity, maybe, or something else. That night, he made camp in a clearing that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades. He set up his tent, built a small fire, and cooked beans over a portable stove. As he ate, he watched the tree line. It felt too quiet. Not just the absence of noise, but a void, like the forest was holding its breath. Around midnight, the fire flickered. Not from wind, there was none, but from a sudden shift in pressure. A presence. From the trees, something moved. Not walked, not crawled. Moved, like smoke, but with weight. He pointed his flashlight into the woods. The beam hit something, tall, pale, and still. It stood maybe 8 feet high, its limbs grotesquely long and thin. Its face was featureless, but as he stared, 2 indents began to form where eyes should be. The eyes weren't there, they became, as if the thing had read his mind and created them just to be looked at. He raised his gun. The thing didn't flinch. Instead, it spoke. Not with sound, with thought. You don't belong here. His ears rang, blood dripped from his nose. He stumbled back into the tent and fired. The sound shattered the silence, but when he looked again, the thing was gone. Just trees. Just the fire, sputtering low. At dawn, Miles found a mirror nailed to a tree just outside the clearing. He hadn't put it there. In the mirror, he saw himself. But not. His reflection smiled. He did not. His reflection raised its hand. He did not. Then the reflection mouthed a word, slowly, silently. Stay. He shot the mirror. The glass cracked, but didn't break. Instead, it bled. He ran, compass spinning, GPS still dead. Every turn took him back to the same goddamn clearing. It was Kayla's journal all over again. He screamed, cursed, tried to climb a tree to get his bearings, but the higher he went, the more the forest bent. The top branches curved down, creating a dome of interlocking limbs above. He was inside a cage, a natural prison. That night, the dreams began. He dreamt of roots wrapping around his legs while he slept, pulling him underground, of faces blooming from the bark of trees, mouths open in soundless screams, of Kayla, her face pale and hollow, whispering from the trees. He took my skin. He wears it now. That's why you can't trust what you see. On the 3rd day, he woke to find his own handwriting scrawled on a log beside his camp. I'm not me anymore. His voice when he spoke echoed twice. The first time as sound, the second time as something else, deeper, like a mimic buried in his chest. That's when he understood. The still doesn't keep you, it copies you. It waits until you're tired, until you're desperate, until you don't know what's real. Then it makes a version of you that doesn't leave. The real you, it erases. On the morning of day 4, Miles found the trail again. The birds had returned. The wind moved the leaves. The sun touched his face. He stumbled out of the woods, filthy, shaking, starving, but alive. He turned his footage over to Henry Vale. Every file from inside the still was corrupted, static, glimpses of faces that weren't his, screams and voices he never remembered making. The notebook was gone from his pack. He tried to move on, told himself it was trauma, a fugue state, the woods playing tricks. But 3 months later, he got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed Miles, standing in the clearing in the still, smiling. Behind him, Kayla stood, skin torn and sagging, her eyes hollow and gray. Both of them were holding hands. On the back of the photo was a note, scrawled in his own handwriting. Thanks for letting me out.
Story number 6.
The old vineyard sat at the edge of town like a rotted wound on the landscape, its iron gates hanging crookedly on rusted hinges, and its grapevines sprawled in a tangled mass of dead wood and choking ivy. Locals whispered that the vineyard had once belonged to a reclusive vintner named Lucien Marceau, a man obsessed with creating the perfect vintage at any cost. It was said that his secret recipes involved far more than mere grapes, and that his final harvest was a cursed affair that claimed the souls of those who dared to taste it. Marion Dubois, a determined investigative reporter with a penchant for the strange and unexplained, had grown up listening to those half-forgotten stories as mere bedtime legends. Now, as an adult, She was drawn to the vineyard by a series of anonymous letters hinting at unspeakable horrors buried within its soil. The letters spoke of gruesome rituals, eerie figures seen at dusk, and a lingering presence that turned innocent harvests into nightmares. Marion resolved to uncover the truth behind the curse of Marceau's vineyard, though the more she learned, the darker her destiny seemed to become. One chill autumn evening, Marion arrived at the weathered entrance of the vineyard. The sun was setting in a slow, lazy arc behind dark, bruised clouds, casting long shadows that danced along the cracked stone walls. With her recorder, a camera, and an old journal she'd inherited from her late grandmother, a woman whose own past was shrouded in inexplicable misfortunes, Marion pushed through the heavy gate. The metal groaned in protest, echoing off the empty rows of dormant vines that lined the property like spectral sentinels. As she stepped onto the gravel path, Marion could feel the weight of the vineyard's history bearing down on her. The air was heavy with the aroma of decaying fruit and damp earth, mixed with a faint, acrid scent that reminded her disturbingly of burnt sugar. Every step she took stirred echoes of the past, as though the ground itself remembered the terror that had once been sown here. Deeper into the vineyard, beneath an ancient sycamore whose branches clawed at the sky, Marion discovered a dilapidated manor that served as the heart of the estate. Its once grand facade was marred by time and neglect, windows shattered, and the front door splintered like a broken promise. Legends claimed that this manor had been the setting for the final, twisted experiment of Lucy Marceau, a grotesque harvest where nature and the human soul became irrevocably entwined. Marion hesitated before entering, her pulse quickening as memories of her grandmother's hushed warnings came flooding back. Yet, driven by her insatiable curiosity and resolve, she stepped inside. The foyer was a cavernous hall of faded opulence. Tattered velvet drapes hung limply in the corners, and a chandelier, half melted and rusted, hung precariously from the ceiling. Marion's flashlight beam flickered along the walls, illuminating portraits of long-dead figures whose eyes seemed to follow her every movement. Among these ghostly visages, one portrait in particular sent a shiver down her spine, a gaunt man with sharp features and eyes that burned with an uncanny hunger. His name, delicately scrawled beneath the frame in tarnished gold leaf, read Lucien Marceau. A sudden whisper of wind, or perhaps a sigh, stirred Marion's hair, and the house seemed to breathe around her. She remembered the letters. They had spoken of voices, murmurs in a language older than time, and of harvests that demanded a terrible price. "Show yourself," she demanded softly into the gloom. No human answered, only the distant creak of old wood and a faint clatter as if something had been disturbed in the next room. Drawn by the sound, Marion crept toward a doorway that led to what appeared to be a dining hall. There, on a long oak table scarred by dark stains and splattered with dried grapes, lay an array of odd artifacts, a set of tarnished silver goblets, a collection of handwritten recipes in a leather-bound notebook, and a carved wooden mask that looked disturbingly like a human face, contorted in perpetual agony. Marion picked up the notebook, her fingers trembling as she turned the fragile pages. The entries chronicled Lucien's descent into madness as he sought to infuse his wine with the essence of life, by any means necessary. His script grew erratic, punctuated by frenzied scrawls and desperate interjections. The harvest must be complete. Blood and wine, soul and vine, they will give their all, willingly or not. The vintage shall be eternal, a legacy written in flesh. Marion's stomach churned. The implications were monstrous, a recipe that sacrificed human lives to bind their essence with the fruit of the vine. The air grew colder still as she continued reading, as if the manor itself disapproved of her intrusion into its grisly secrets. A sudden bang startled her, a loud, deliberate knock coming from the corridor beyond. Marion clutched the notebook to her chest and edged toward the sound. As she stepped into the narrow hallway, the darkness shifted into vague silhouettes, and she discerned a figure at the far end, a man in a tattered suit, his face obscured by shadow and a wide-brimmed hat. His voice, low and resonant, broke the oppressive silence. "Curiosity is a dangerous vine, mademoiselle," the figure intoned, his words measured and laden with sorrow. "It grows, entangles, and eventually strangles the life within." Marion's hand tightened around her flashlight. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice quivering between defiance and dread. The man stepped forward into a shaft of pale moonlight that had crept through a broken window. His gaunt features were etched with grief, yet there was a spark of something earnest in his eyes. "I am Henry," he replied softly. "I once tended this estate. I tried to save it from the curse my master unleashed, but the harvest demanded its due, and I lost much more than I can bear to recount." Before Marion could press further, a distant chorus of voices drifted up the hall. The sound was ethereal, like a lament sung by 1,000 mournful souls. Henry's eyes darkened. "The vineyard calls to them," he warned. "Every year, on the night of the final harvest, the lost come back, driven by the eternal hunger of the land. They roam these halls seeking release or revenge." Marion felt a chill crawl up her spine as Henry's words melded with the sorrowful chorus echoing through the manor. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. He regarded her with a haunted gaze. Lucien intended to create a wine that would confer immortality, but at an unimaginable cost. In his madness, he bargained with forces that lie beyond mortal ken. That cursed vintage was not merely wine. It was a tether binding the souls of his victims to this estate. Every fallen life added to its potency, and as time passed, the estate grew hungrier. Outside, the wind rattled through the broken glass, and the sound of shuffling footsteps receded along the corridor. "They are coming," Henry said urgently. "The final harvest begins tonight." Marion's heart pounded in her ears as she realized the gravity of her discovery. Without warning, the manor's grand clock, silent for decades, began to chime a slow, hollow toll. The sound reverberated through the halls, each toll echoing like the heartbeat of some monstrous beast. The windows trembled with the force of the sound, and the very walls seemed to bleed despair. Henry pulled her gently by the arm, urging her to follow him into a side passage leading to a hidden stairway. "We must descend to the cellar," he whispered. "There we may find the key to ending this cycle of cursed harvests." The narrow stairs spiraled downward into complete darkness. Marion's flashlight flickered as if warning her of unseen dangers. The cellar was vast, lined with stone shelves that bore ancient bottles, their labels faded and dripping with time. In the center of the room, upon a stone pedestal, rested a large oak crate sealed with thick iron bands. An inscription, barely legible under layers of grime, read, "Nourriture de l'âme." Marion's pulse raced as she recognized that it meant food of the soul. Henry's voice dropped to a whisper as he recounted a tale of unspeakable horror. Lucien believed that the perfect wine required the essence of pure life. With each harvest, he collected a soul. At last, his ambition became too great, and he performed the ritual of abundance. The wine flowed like a river of blood, and those sacrificed were forever locked within the vines of this estate. For centuries, the curse has fed on their anguish, but it is not too late to put an end to it. Marion's eyes scanned the cellar until they fixed upon an old ledger on a dusty table. The ledger contained names, dates, and cryptic notes scrawled in a spidery hand. The final entry was chilling. "In the wine, I found immortality, but at the cost of eternal torment. May my sins be washed away in the harvest that follows." As she read, the temperature in the cellar plummeted further, and a palpable aura of despair filled the air. A sudden clatter echoed near the crate. Marion and Henry exchanged a look of dread before creeping toward the sound. The crate's lid was slightly ajar, and from within an odd rhythmic scraping could be heard. With trembling hands, Marion pushed the lid open. A dense, sickly sweet vapor escaped, and beneath it lay rows of ancient twisted grapevines, each one writhing as if possessed by a malevolent spirit. Intertwined among the vines were the remnants of withered corpses, pallid faces twisted in terror, limbs contorted in unnatural positions, the grisly aftermath of Lucien's unholy ritual. Marion's stomach churned as she recoiled in horror at the monstrous tableau. Before she could step back, a low, guttural moan filled the cellar. The vines shivered, and the decaying bodies began to twitch, as though animated by the cursed nectar that sustained them. Henry shouted, "They rise for the harvest!" His voice was overpowered by the rising din of moans and the rustling of countless leaves. Panic ignited in Marion. She clutched the ledger and backed toward the stairs, but the cellar's oppressive dark seemed to shift around her. The walls pulsed with a dreadful energy as the tendrils of the vines reached out to ensnare her. "Run!" Henry cried, and together they fled upward, stumbling through the narrow passages as the undead harvest pursued them with unearthly determination. Marion's breath came in ragged gasps as she felt cold, clammy fingers brush against her shoulder, as though the curse itself wished to claim her soul. Bursting into the upper halls of the manor, they found the corridor transformed. Where moments before the opulent decor had whispered of faded grandeur, now the walls bled dark red, and shadowy figures drifted along the passage, their eyes hollow and their mouths open in silent screams. Henry grabbed Marion's hand. "We must break the curse," he urged. "There is a way, if we can destroy the master vintage." Marion's mind raced as she recalled the recipes in Lucien's notebook. In a hidden study behind a false bookcase, they found an ancient copper still, dusty yet still functional, and a collection of ingredients that Lucien had once used to concoct his cursed elixir. Among them was a vial of distilled water from a sacred spring said to purify even the darkest of stains. The instructions, scrawled in trembling ink, directed that the purified water be mixed with a rare herb, the bitter nightshade, known to bloom only in the heart of the cursed vineyard. This mixture, when poured over the master vintage, would sever the unholy bond between the wine and the souls trapped within it. With no time to lose, Marion and Henry raced back toward the vineyard under a sky black as pitch. Outside, the full moon illuminated the twisted landscape where the grapevines writhed in a macabre dance. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom. Guided by the ledger's cryptic coordinates, they located a secluded glen deep among the vines. In the center of the glen stood a gnarled, ancient vine that pulsed with a sickly, phosphorescent light, a living embodiment of Lucien's dark magic. Marion retrieved the vial of sacred water from her pack, while Henry, with great care, plucked several clusters of berries from the vine of nightshade that grew wild in a nearby thicket. The two worked in frantic synchronization. Under the milky light of the moon, they mixed the ingredients in a weathered brass bowl, the mixture hissing as if alive. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath while an unseen force stirred in disquiet. As they approached the pulsating vine, the air grew dense with malevolence. The vine's tendrils recoiled as if sensing the impending strike against its dark lifeblood. Marion raised the bowl and splashed the concoction over the vine's base. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The vine shuddered violently, and a cacophony of agonized shrieks rose from deep beneath the earth, as if the souls trapped within were crying out in both terror and relief. The ground trembled, vines writhed and began to wither at an alarming rate. Henry's eyes widened with both hope and horror as the cursed foliage started to collapse in on itself, releasing a cloud of dark, swirling mist that dissipated into nothingness. The unnatural red light faded from the glen, and the oppressive aura lifted, replaced by an eerie silence that spoke of a curse broken at last. For a moment, the entire vineyard seemed to exhale, the relentless hunger of the cursed harvest finally quenched. Marion and Henri stood in the center of the glen, drenched in the aftermath of their desperate act. The silence was heavy with sorrow and the memory of all those lost to Lucien Marceau's unholy ambition. In that silence, Marion felt the weight of the secrets she had uncovered, a legacy of greed, madness, and the desperation to control life itself. The cursed wine would no longer flow, and with it, the souls would be released to finally find peace. But as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, heralding a new day free of the dark harvest, Marion couldn't shake the faintest echo of a whisper, carried on the morning breeze, a final murmur of the past full of regret and longing. You may break the bond, but the memory lingers. Though the words were faint, they resonated in her heart like the toll of a distant bell, a reminder that some horrors never truly die. They only wait in the shadows, for another unsuspecting soul to stumble upon their dark legacy. Marion left the vineyard that day with a heavy heart and a story that would challenge everything she knew about the nature of ambition, sacrifice, and the price of perfection. Henri disappeared shortly after, that leaving behind only his haunted eyes and a promise to guard the secret of the land until the next harvest of darkness could be prevented. In the months that followed, Marion's articles stirred controversy and disbelief among the townsfolk. Some dismissed her words as wild fantasies born of an overactive imagination, while others recognized the truth in the frightened glances exchanged whenever the old vineyard was mentioned. In quiet moments late at night, Marion would sometimes find herself walking past the ruins at the edge of town, drawn by an inexplicable pull. and if she listened very carefully, she might still hear the distant, sorrowful call of those freed souls. A reminder that even after the most terrible curses are broken, the echoes of the past never entirely fade away.
Story number 7.
The autumn wind howled through the desolate parking lot as Cassandra Avery pulled her battered sedan to a stop in front of an old drive-in theater that time had long abandoned. Its once bright neon marquee now flickered with intermittent ghostly glows. The theater had a reputation in the nearby county as a cursed relic, a place where the boundary between past and present, life and death, blurred into nightmare. Cassandra, a writer with a thirst for dark history, had heard endless rumors, mysterious lights dancing in the screen's darkness, phantom voices echoing among the rusted speakers, and spectral figures seen strolling between the rows at midnight. With a mix of determination and apprehension, she stepped out into the chill, bracing herself against the wind that whispered warnings only the forgotten souls could understand. Cassandra entered through the broken glass door, its jagged edges a testament to decades of neglect. Inside, the drive-in's concession stand sat in ruins, its old popcorn machine half collapsed and rusting beneath thick layers of dust. She flicked on her flashlight and made her way through rows of broken seats and discarded objects, empty soda cups, shredded tickets, and faded photographs of a happier, simpler time when laughter filled the nights. Every step she took stirred memories of long-lost celebrations and unspoken tragedies. The silence pressed in on her, punctuated only by the occasional groan of the wind outside. Drawn by both curiosity and a desire to capture every detail for her writing, Cassandra headed toward the main screen. It loomed ahead like a giant, dark canvas waiting to reveal its secrets. As she got closer, she noticed strange markings on the concrete floor. Scratched deeply into the surface were swirling symbols and cryptic patterns that resembled both ancient runes and desperate pleas for mercy. Their origin was unknown, but they pulsed with an energy that made her skin crawl. She recalled what old Mr. Whitcomb, one of the few locals who dared speak of the place, had told her. "There's a mirror behind that screen," he had whispered with trembling eyes. "A mirror that shows you what you fear most, and sometimes it shows you what's coming for you." Cassandra had dismissed it as superstition at first. Now, standing in the ghost of a once vibrant cultural haunt, doubt began to gnaw at her resolve. Determined to find the truth, Cassandra walked to the edge of the screen, where, behind a ragged piece of curtain that once separated the projection booth from the theater, she discovered an old ornate mirror leaning against the wall. Its silvered glass was largely intact, yet the frame was encrusted with what appeared to be dried blood and delicate carvings of anguished faces. Hesitant yet compelled, she approached and peered into its depths. At first, she saw only her own reflection, pale and anxious in the dim beam of her flashlight. But as she stared longer, the reflection began to ripple as though it were water disturbed by an unseen current. In the flickering images, a scene unfolded behind her. Figures, indistinct and dark, began to crawl into view. A procession of gaunt, sorrowful faces with eyes that glowed like embers. The figures moved slowly, their mouths open in silent cries that seemed to merge with the soft hum of the wind outside. Transfixed, Cassandra felt a prickle of dread twist in her stomach. The mirror showed not the theater behind her, but a twisted version of it, one where decades of despair and violence had seeped into every crack, every shadow. A sudden clatter echoed behind her, snapping her attention away from the mirror. She spun around, heart pounding, to see a man standing near the entrance to the projection booth. He was dressed in a torn, outdated suit, and his eyes were the color of long-forgotten sorrow. His presence was incongruent, a relic of a bygone era, and yet he appeared tangible enough. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, his voice like rusted metal scraping against stone. "This place, it hungers for souls who dare to unearth its secrets." Cassandra's pulse hammered in her ears as she tried to steady her voice. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone a mixture of fear and fascination. "What happened here?" He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving the mirror. "I am Edmund," he replied in a low, measured cadence. "I was once a custodian of this theater, a keeper of its memories." Lucian, the man who built it, sought to capture more than mere images on celluloid. He wanted to immortalize the essence of fear, the terror of loss, the agony of regret. In his final experiment, he opened a door to something unspeakably dark, and now this place is his prison, bound by the echoes of sorrow. At his words, a cold shiver raced down Cassandra's spine. She glanced back at the mirror. In its murky depths, the swirling faces seemed to mourn, their expressions contorted in agony. "What do you mean? What did he do?" she whispered. Edmund's gaze hardened with pain. Lucien believed that by channeling the terror of his audience, he could create a performance so powerful that it would bind them to his legacy. His experiment went awry. Instead of capturing fleeting emotions, he ensnared the very souls of those who watched, their essence trapped in a loop of endless torment. The mirror is a conduit, a window into that horror. It shows you what remains, what is left behind when the fear becomes so great that it never dies. As if on cue, behind them, the projector room's door creaked open. A gust of frigid air swept along the dark corridor, and the murmur of voices, the faint, despairing sound of 1,000 lost souls, seemed to swell into a low chant that vibrated through the very foundation of the theater. Edmund's eyes widened with resignation. "It begins," he said softly. "The mirror awakens when the moon is at its zenith. Tonight, the past will seek to reclaim what it has lost." Cassandra swallowed hard, her logical mind torn between the need to record this supernatural phenomenon and the primal urge to flee. As the chill deepened and shadows lengthened, she followed Edmund down a narrow, winding staircase that led from the projection booth into the sublevels of the theater. Dust danced in the beam of her flashlight as they descended into a labyrinth of forgotten storage rooms and passageways. The sound of their footsteps echoed hollowly, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew and ancient decay. They came upon a chamber at the very heart of the building, a room lined with rows of old film reels, each housed in a glass case that had long since succumbed to grime. In the center of the room stood an apparatus, a massive, antique projector surrounded by a semicircle of mirrors. It was as if the contraption had been constructed not merely to display films, but to capture and replay the deepest nightmares of its audience. Edmund motioned to Cassandra. "This is where the ritual is bound," he said, his voice trembling as he recounted long-hidden details. Lucien devised this machine to siphon the terror of those who watched the films. But something went wrong. Instead of burning away their fears, it locked them inside the silver glass, a purgatory of perpetual grief. Cassandra's mind raced as she tried to comprehend the horror. "But why show all these images?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why does the mirror reveal these tormenting faces?" Edmund's eyes reflected despair and resignation as he explained, "It is not merely a mirror. It is a memorial to those who suffered. Every face, every cry you see is a remnant of their final unspeakable moments. They are forever caught between life and death, waiting for someone to acknowledge their pain so that they might finally find release." The whispers of the lost grew louder, as if in answer to his words. Cassandra could now feel their presence pressed against her mind, a mournful chorus pleading, lamenting, and cursing in equal measure. In that spectral moment, as the overhead light flickered and then dimmed entirely, the old projector roared to life. The reels began to spin, and the mirrors around the room reflected ghostly images that danced in time with the flickering light. The images were not mere films, they were windows into endless horrors, a montage of the most desperate, unredeemed moments of the past, as if captured in an eternity of anguish. Cassandra's heart pounded in terror. She raised her camera, determined to document every detail, even as she felt her rational mind slip away into the madness of the moment. I need to show this," she stammered, voice quivering as she recorded. But before she could press record fully, a disembodied voice filled the chamber, a voice that echoed with both authority and hopeless despair. "Dare not disturb the dead," it intoned, and the sound reverberated like the tolling of a funeral bell. "For every secret revealed, another soul is bound. Every glimpse you take, every flash of memory, adds to the darkness." Cassandra stepped back, her eyes wide with terror. Edmund's face paled as he looked toward the center of the projection chamber, where a new image began to form on the largest mirror, a face contorted by pure, unadulterated agony. The face was so familiar, it sent a ripple through Cassandra's core. In that tortured expression, she saw her own face, but twisted beyond recognition, the eyes hollow and devoid of hope. The mirror's surface rippled, and the agony from that visage seeped into her mind. The presence of the dead, fueled by decades of despair, made her skin crawl and her heart race. "Run," Edmund hissed urgently, "before they claim you." But his words were swallowed by the rising cacophony of anguished whispers. The chamber seemed to warp and shift, as if the very structure of the theater were buckling under the weight of unseen forces. The mirrors multiplied the horror, fracturing the images into countless fragments that danced around the room in a fevered, nightmarish ballet. Cassandra's resolve began to fracture under the relentless assault of haunted visions and spectral terrors. Every sense screamed for escape, yet something deep inside, perhaps the desperate need to know, anchored her to that cursed chamber. Her camera trembled in her grasp as she recorded, each click of the shutter echoing like a death knell. In a moment of paralyzing terror, the mirror at the front of the chamber split open, as if yielding to a hidden key. From the fissure, a cold, fetid wind burst forth, carrying with it the scent of decay and the sound of distant screams. Out of that rift emerged a figure draped in shadow, a tall, gaunt specter with eyes like burning coals and a mouth stretched into a perpetual silent wail. Its form was insubstantial yet terrifyingly real. It moved toward Cassandra, each step accompanied by the slow, measured toll of unseen bells. "You have seen too much," the specter intoned, its voice a blend of sorrow and menace that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "The mirror does not give freedom, it gives imprisonment. In capturing your fear, you have bound yourself to the legacy of this cursed place." Cassandra staggered backward, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of panic and regret. "Please, let me go," she pleaded, voice breaking as the phantom drew nearer, its gaze piercing her soul. "I only wanted to understand." The specter extended a pale, skeletal hand. "Understanding comes at a cost," it whispered. "Your curiosity has awakened what should have remained in silence. Now you must pay the price for the secrets of the dead." In that final moment of dread, the chamber convulsed violently. The projections shattered like glass, scattering images of torment throughout the room. The mirrors cracked, splitting into shards that reflected myriad terrors. Each fragment a frozen instant of a soul lost to despair. Cassandra felt herself being pulled toward the mirror's gaping maw, as if invisible hands were drawing her into the vortex of endless sorrow. Her camera fell from her trembling fingers. As her vision blurred and the room spun into darkness, the last thing she heard was the spectral lament, echoing in her mind along with the dying toll of the phantom bells. In a moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity of anguish, Cassandra's scream was swallowed by the overwhelming silence that followed, leaving nothing behind but the eternal murmur of the cursed theater. Outside, the drive-in stood silent under the watchful gaze of the indifferent night. The neon marquee flickered once more, a fading beacon in the darkness, while the wind carried away the echoes of a horror that would forever remain trapped within the haunted glass of a mirror and the shattered remnants of lost souls.
Story number 8.
In the bruised twilight of a forgotten industrial town, Michael Calloway drove past silent streets swallowed by creeping ivy and rusting machinery. His destination was the derelict iron mill perched on the outskirts, a hulking mass of corrugated metal and shattered glass, its broken windows staring like empty sockets. Michael's pulse pounded in the quiet as he recalled the urgent voice of his missing friend, Darren, whose last known location was near these very ruins. Determined to unravel the mystery that had haunted his every thought since Darren disappeared, Michael parked his car in a cracked lot overrun with weeds, took a deep breath, and stepped into the grim darkness of the town. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of decay and secrets. Every step along the cracked pavement echoed in a way that made him feel as though unseen eyes were watching his progress. He noticed how the old brick buildings seemed to lean in conspiratorially, their facades worn away like the faded memories of the town's long-dead inhabitants. A chill seeped into his bones as he made his way toward the iron mill, where a giant iron arch, sagging and mottled with rust, marked the entrance. Before he could approach further, a soft, gravelly voice halted his steps. "You shouldn't be here." Michael jerked around to see a gaunt, middle-aged woman emerging from a doorway. Her eyes, shadowed by a heavy knit cap, carried both sorrow and warning. "Name's Ruth," she said, her voice trembling just as if it too carried a hidden burden. "I've lived here all my life, and I know these parts. The mill, it's not safe. Not for you, nor for anyone who dares disturb the dead." Michael's heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline and sympathy. I'm looking for my friend, Darren. He disappeared near the mill a week ago. I need to know what happened. His plea was earnest, the sound of his voice swallowed by the ghostly stillness. Ruth's eyes darkened as she lowered her gaze. Darren was drawn by the secrets of this place, she murmured. Once, the mill was the heart of our town, but not in a good way. They say the men who worked here made a terrible bargain long ago, one that stained the very foundation of this building with endless grief and malice. Unsure whether to be comforted or alarmed by her words, Michael hesitated. A bargain? He asked softly. Ruth nodded, her voice faltering under the weight of old memories. Back in 1923, when the mill was at its peak and fortunes were being made on sweat and sorrow, the owner, Mr. Harlan, sought a way to boost production beyond human limits. There were whispers of occult practices, an ancient ritual to harness the very life force of his workers. They were desperate souls, and in exchange for promised prosperity, they were offered a chance at eternal life. But the ritual twisted into a nightmare. An accident occurred, a fire, they say, that claimed nearly 100 lives. Since then, the ghostly voices of those wronged souls have haunted every corner of the mill. They're bound by a curse, a pact sealed with desperation and spilled blood. Michael swallowed hard. The air seemed to grow thinner as if laden with the unspoken grief of those whose lives were lost in that horrific moment. His journalist's curiosity warred with a rising, inexplicable terror. "Do you know if there's anything left that might explain all this?" he pressed, desperate for a concrete thread to follow. Ruth glanced over her shoulder as if wary of prying ears. "There's a ledger hidden in the mill's basement," she whispered urgently. "It details every sacrifice and the ritual that went wrong. But be warned, the further you go, the more you'll feel it. A presence that does not wish to be disturbed." With a solemn nod, Michael thanked Ruth, and clutching his flashlight and camera, he made his way to the foreboding entrance of the mill. The massive iron door creaked open with reluctant protest, revealing a yawning corridor cloaked in dense shadows. Every echo of his footsteps resonated as a reminder that this was no ordinary abandoned building. It was a mausoleum of buried secrets. Inside the main hall of the mill, beams of weak light punctured the darkness through shattered windows, forming eerie, ghost-like patterns on the concrete floor. The scent of burnt metal, dust, and something fouler, an odor that might have been sweat and fear, permeated the air. Michael paused at a rusted metal staircase that led down into the bowels of the building. The sound of his heartbeat was the only companion as he descended, each creak of the stairs a jarring note in the dirge of the past. Down in the basement, the atmosphere was suffocating. Michael's flashlight revealed remnants of machinery strewn about like the carcasses of industrial beasts. In the far corner of a large open room, partially hidden behind a collapsed stack of wooden crates, he spotted a heavy iron-bound chest. With trembling hands and a mounting sense of foreboding, he heaved the lid open. Inside lay a weathered ledger, its pages thick with age and stained with rust and something darker, perhaps dried blood. The ledger's pages were filled with cryptic entries and incomplete numbers that pointed to names, dates, and the unholy rituals performed within these walls. Michael's voice trembled as he recorded on his camera. "This ledger, it's all here. Dates, names, testimonies of sacrifice." As his light flickered over one page, a message appeared scrawled in spidery handwriting. "We offered our lives so the mill might live on." The words sent a shiver down his spine. His mind raced. If this ledger was the key to understanding the curse, then it might also hold clues to Darren's disappearance. A distant, echoing clatter abruptly shattered the silence. Michael's heart jumped into his throat. The sound came from above. Clutching the ledger tightly, he retraced his steps up the damp stairs, his flashlight beam trembling as it swept over the walls. In the oppressive gloom, he thought he saw a fleeting figure, the outline of a man, hunched and seemingly transparent. When he called out, "Hello? Who's there?" only the sound of his own echo answered back. Pressing forward, Michael explored a large room that appeared to have once served as an office for Mr. Harlan himself. The room was littered with dusty papers, broken furniture, and fading photographs. In one particularly striking photograph, a group of workers posed before the mill, some faces blurred by time, but others clear and determined. In the center stood a man with cold, calculating eyes, his hand outstretched as if offering a bargain. Michael recognized the description from Ruth's tale. It was Mr. Harlan. Suddenly, as if drawn by the weight of the past, the overhead lights flickered and dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness. In that oppressive half-light, a low, mournful moan echoed through the space, a sound that seemed to seep from the very walls. "Leave," it whispered, elongated and spectral, as though an unseen force were speaking directly into Michael's mind. A surge of panic gripped him. He flipped his camera on, recording every moment, every whisper of the supernatural. "Darren, if you're here, answer me," he shouted into the darkness, his voice quivering with both determination and fear. For a long, agonizing moment, the only response was the relentless drip of water echoing in the silence. Then, from behind a shattered window, he saw a small shape, fragile, shivering. It was a young man, half hidden in the gloom, his eyes wide with terror and pleading for help. "Please, help me," the figure rasped, voice barely audible above the oppressive silence. Michael rushed to him, his heart pounding with desperate hope. As he reached out, the young man dissolved into a mist, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his plea and a faint, chilling laughter that seemed to echo from every corner of the room. Michael's mind spun with horror and confusion. Had he truly seen Darren? Or was he another phantom, drawn into the cursed labyrinth of the mill? Grasping the ledger like a talisman, he resolved to piece together the grim puzzle no matter the personal cost. The ledger spoke of a ritual, a desperate, forbidden incantation performed in the mill's most hidden chamber. It detailed that Mr. Harlan had exploited the life force of his workers, binding their souls to the mill with the promise of prosperity that turned into a toxic curse. Their collective anguish and betrayal had warped the building into a living relic, one that now lured the unwary with promises of forgotten secrets and unfathomable power. Determined now more than ever, Michael followed the faded markings scribbled on the ledger that appeared to point toward a concealed door behind a rusted metal partition deep within the basement corridors. With a heavy mix of trepidation and resolve, he pried the door open. The space beyond was narrow, the air dense with an almost tangible malevolence that seemed to suffocate any courage. In the dim beam of his flashlight, he revealed a small, circular chamber lined with ancient stone. At its center lay a stone pedestal upon which rested a peculiar object. A small, ornate box made of blackened iron and intricately carved with symbols that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. The ledger had mentioned this box in one of its cryptic entries, describing it as the vessel of our doom. Michael's hands trembled as he lifted the lid, revealing a collection of objects, a faded ribbon, a rusted key, and a locket that held a tiny, sepia-toned portrait of a smiling woman whose eyes seemed to gaze mournfully back at him. Behind the portrait, another inscription was etched into the metal: "Release the damned, or forever be bound." At that very moment, the chamber's temperature plummeted. The sound of whispered voices swirled around him, a cacophony of sorrow and wrath colliding in an otherworldly chorus. Michael's heart thundered as the room trembled. The very stones vibrated with the collective anguish of those who had suffered within the mill's cursed confines. In a desperate bid to break the cycle of torment, Michael recalled the words written in the ledger that hinted at a way to appease the restless spirits. It required a ritual of acknowledgement, a promise that their suffering would not be forgotten, that their stories would be told so their souls might finally rest. Voice shaking, Michael spoke aloud into the oppressive darkness. "I remember you. I honor your pain and your sacrifice. I will tell your story." His words, though tentative, seemed to resonate in the cavernous space. For a fleeting moment, the oppressive clamor eased, replaced by a fragile hush, as if the very air was listening. Then the chamber came alive with spectral activity. A flood of ghostly figures, their forms half material and half shadow, surged into the space. Their faces were etched with sorrow and wrath, and in their eyes, Michael saw the echoes of all the lives claimed by the mill's greedy ambition. One by one, they stepped forward, their voices a plaintive chorus of "Remember us." Their chorus filled the chamber, merging into a single, heart-wrenching refrain that reverberated in Michael's soul. In that moment, Michael understood that the curse would remain unbroken unless their memory was set free. With trembling determination, he took out his notebook and began to record every detail: the ledger's accounts, the faceless pleas, and the tragic history of exploitation and despair that had cursed this place. He vowed to carry their stories to the outside world, ensuring that the ghosts of the iron mill were not consigned to endless torment in the silence of forgotten history. As the spectral figures began to fade, their anguished voices softened into gratitude. A final vision passed before Michael's eyes, a glimpse of Darren, his face etched with relief and sorrow, mouthing a silent farewell before dissolving into darkness. Michael sank to his knees in the echoing chamber, the notebook clutched in his hands. In that act of remembrance, he felt a subtle warmth, a quiet reassurance that the spirits were finally being heard. Leaving the hidden chamber behind, Michael retraced his steps through the labyrinthine corridors of the mill. Outside, the once oppressive night seemed a little less threatening. The wind whispered among the derelict buildings, carrying with it not only the scent of decay, but also the faint strains of long-forgotten voices, now at peace. In the days that followed, Michael returned to the nearby town, burdened with the grim responsibility of bearing witness to the truth he had uncovered. His articles, published in local papers and eventually picked up by larger media, recounted the haunted legacy of the iron mill. Through his words, the memories of its tragic past were resurrected, and the restless spirits were given the acknowledgement they so desperately craved. Although Michael himself was forever changed, haunted by the specters that would visit him in quiet moments, he also found solace in the knowledge that Darren's fate and the souls of the damned might now rest, finally free from the curse of unremembered suffering. And sometimes, on quiet, storm-washed nights, when the winds stirred just so, Michael would pause and hear the soft murmur of distant voices whispering among the ruins, a gentle reminder that in the act of remembrance, even the deepest curses can begin to lift.
Story number 9.
The city's neon heartbeat pulsed above, while deep beneath the bustling streets lay a world long forgotten, a vast labyrinth of abandoned tunnels and silent platforms where time had frozen in perpetual twilight. Under the cloak of midnight, when the modern metropolis slumbered and the hum of traffic faded into a distant murmur, a solitary figure descended into the underground. His name was Adrian Cole, a man once employed as a transit maintenance worker whose eyes had witnessed inexplicable occurrences that defied the logic of the everyday. Tonight, drawn by the insatiable urge to confront those buried secrets, he would journey into the infamous station known by urban legends as the Lost Track. Adrian remembered the warnings clearly. Whispered rumors among former colleagues, tremulous confessions in hushed voices at late-night diners, and even scribbled notes on crumpled paper left in locked maintenance closets. They spoke of ghostly apparitions, phantom conductors, and echoing announcements announcing a train that never arrived. There was talk of a station left to rot by the relentless march of time, a place where the living and the dead converged in a macabre dance. His own nightmares, punctuated by indistinct voices calling his name, had led him here. With a heavy rucksack, a reliable flashlight, and an old digital recorder clutched tightly in his gloved hand, Adrian stepped through a crumbling service door, tucked away on a rarely used alley. The concrete stairwell yawned before him, descending into an impenetrable darkness beneath layers of urban detritus and history. At the base of the stairwell, the musty scent of damp earth and rust filled his lungs. His beam of light revealed narrow passages lined with ancient, graffiti-marred tiles and peeling posters from defunct transit lines. The air was cold and unnervingly still, as if the underground had held its breath for decades. Adrian's boots splashed in shallow puddles left by leaking water, and each echo of his careful step reverberated like a heartbeat in the silent expanse. He paused at what once had been a station concourse. Dilapidated ticket booths and rusted turnstiles formed ghostly sentinels around him. Faded advertisements on the walls proclaiming destinations in bold, cheerful letters decades past now served as relics from another life, a time when hope and urgency mingled with the promise of travel. But now something was off. There was no hum of electricity, no mechanical clatter, only a persistent, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to seep from the very walls. "Adrian," a voice echoed softly, seemingly carried on the stale, cold current of air. His heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. He fumbled for his recorder and switched it on. "Hello," he called into the silence, his voice cracking slightly in the oppressive gloom. No answer came, just the sound of his own words swallowed by the vast emptiness. Cautiously, he proceeded down a long, narrow corridor where the flicker of his flashlight revealed remnants of once vibrant tiling now marred by cracks and ghostly smears of dark stains. A dilapidated clock hung crookedly on the wall. Its hands, frozen in time, pointed to 11:47 p.m. Adrian's skin prickled with the sense of being watched. He continued forward with measured steps until he reached a set of double doors that led into a vast waiting area. A cavernous expanse with high ceilings and rows of abandoned, dented benches. The silence was oppressive, punctuated by distant, rhythmic drips of water. As he stepped onto the cracked floor, his flashlight beam caught a series of faded footprints leading toward the far end of the room. They were shallow, as if made by someone who had scarcely pressed their feet to the ground, disappearing into a narrow archway beyond a collapsed wall of rusted beams. Compelled by equal parts dread and determination, Adrian followed the trail. In the archway, the air grew markedly colder. The remains of a battered PA system hung limply from the ceiling, its static filling the space with intermittent bursts of white noise that sounded almost like fragmented announcements. One garbled voice hissed, "Next train, last train, all aboard," before dropping into silence. Adrian's pulse quickened, and he noted the irony. A phantom train call echoing from a place long sealed off from the living. Beyond the archway, he found a long corridor lined with doors whose numbers were barely legible. Most of them were empty, their surfaces scarred by age and decay. But one door at the very end bore a faded sign, Platform 13. Adrian paused, the hairs on his neck rising. In all the history of the transit system, no one had ever spoken of a Platform 13. Even in old records, the station was designated with numbers in the single digits. Uncertainty warred with an inexplicable pull, urging him to push the door open. With a cautious creak, the heavy door swung inward. The space beyond was shrouded in deep shadow, an expanse that seemed to stretch far beyond what his eyes could grasp. His light revealed an abandoned platform under a vaulted ceiling. The tracks, thick with grime and rust, extended into darkness. An ancient, tattered bench sat forlorn near a sign that read in peeling letters, "The Midnight Line." A cold draft swept along the platform, carrying with it the faintest murmur of voices and the rustle of unseen movement. Adrian's breath came shallow as he stepped onto the platform. He almost expected to see a train pull in, but there was only silence. As he moved slowly along the tracks, his recorder captured every sound, each drip, each scuff of his shoe on the metal, and over it all, a low murmur that swelled into the unmistakable cadence of a farewell. The voice, now clearer than before, murmured, "We never left." The sound was not of a single person, but a chorus of whispers layered upon each other, imbued with a profound melancholy that chilled him to the bone. A sudden flash of movement at the end of the platform caught his eye. In the distance, where the darkness swallowed the tracks, a solitary figure stood motionless. The figure was shrouded in shadow, its form obscured beneath a long coat and a hat pulled low over its face. For an agonizing moment, the figure seemed to flicker, almost as if it were dissolving into the gloom, and then reappeared, closer this time. Heart pounding, Adrian froze. The figure raised a hand in a slow, deliberate gesture that might have been a greeting or a warning. But before Adrian could call out, the figure vanished without a sound, leaving only the echo of its presence lingering like a memory. Driven by fear and an overwhelming compulsion to understand, Adrian turned his flashlight toward the far end of the platform once more. There he noticed something peculiar. A set of old, hand-painted numbers on the wall behind a collapsed part of the station, numbers that spelled out a date. They read, October 31st, 1978. A sense of dread mingled with curiosity surged through him. He recalled that on Halloween of that year, the city had been plagued by inexplicable disappearances and bizarre sightings. Rumors had spread like wildfire about a ghost train that devoured souls on All Hallows' Eve. Could this platform be the remnants of that cursed night? Overcome by a mix of apprehension and resolve, Adrian moved further along the platform. Each step felt weighted with the spirits of the past, as though he were walking the memories of countless lost souls. His recorder continued to capture every eerie whisper until he reached a set of rusted stairs leading down to a lower level. It was here, the legend said, that the true heart of the curse lay hidden, a subterranean concourse where the echoes of the dead gathered and the train of the midnight line still waited for its next passengers. Descending into the darkness, Adrian felt the atmosphere change abruptly. The stifling chill deepened, and the only sound was the irregular drip of water from the ceiling. At the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in a narrow tunnel lined with old service rooms. The walls were adorned with faded maps, intricate diagrams of the subway system, and cryptic symbols drawn in what looked like chalk or ancient ink. In the center of the tunnel stood a single object, a heavy antique timepiece resting on a pedestal. Its face was encrusted with rust, and its hands were frozen at 12. As he stepped closer, a sudden rush of wind blasted through the tunnel, scattering dust and fragments of paper. In that moment, the timepiece began to tick, a slow, deliberate rhythm that grew steadily louder, resonating as if it were counting down to some unknown climax. Adrian's hands trembled as he held up his recorder. "I can hear it ticking," he whispered into the device, voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "It's as if time is unraveling here." The sound of the ticking merged with the ambient echoes, creating a cacophonous symphony that threatened to drown out his very thoughts. Then, as if in answer to his unspoken query, a new sound emerged, a distinct, guttural chime that resonated deep within his bones, and then an unmistakable call, "All aboard." A spectral illumination began to fill the tunnel as if a hidden source of light had been unleashed. In the distance, the rails glowed with an unnatural luminescence, guiding his gaze toward an approaching silhouette. A spectral train was coming, a locomotive of long-forgotten design, its edges blurred and its form wavering between the tangible and the ephemeral. The train's whistle, a sound that could only be described as the lament of 1,000 souls, pierced the air, echoing through the corridor with a chilling finality. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. He stood rooted in place, torn between the instinct to flee and the inexorable pull of the mystery before him. The spectral train glided to a stop at the tunnel's end, its doors sliding open with a sound that resembled a collective sigh. From its dark interior emerged figures draped in antiquated attire. Their eyes were vacant yet sad, and their faces wore expressions of resigned sorrow. They began to file out in an orderly procession, their feet barely making a sound on the cold concrete. One of them, a slender man in a threadbare suit, turned his head slowly and looked directly at Adrian. In a hollow, echoing voice, he said, "You have come, at last." The man's voice was suffused with centuries of longing and regret. "We are those who were lost to time, caught in the between places. We ride the midnight line for one final journey, a journey toward oblivion or perhaps redemption. But our path is not one for the living." His eyes bored into Adrian's, and for a moment he felt as though the weight of all their sorrows pressed upon his soul. Before Adrian could answer, the world around him seemed to shudder. The spectral passengers began to fade into the swirling mists of the tunnel, and the luminous train began to vanish as if it were a mirage. The chime of the ancient timepiece grew louder still, forcing him to confront a dreadful realization. This was a threshold, a place where the boundary between life and death had blurred irreparably. In that heart-stopping moment, the corridor's silence shattered as the phantom train's siren cried out one last time. The very air seemed to tear open, and from the depths of that rupture emerged a vision so horrifying that it defied description. A colossal, shadowy figure, its form a writhing mass of tendrils and distorted faces, emerged from the darkness. It moved with deliberate malice, as if searching for something or someone, perhaps the next lost soul to claim. Its many eyes glowed with a baleful light, and its voice, a cacophony of screams and whispers, reverberated in Adrian's mind. "Join us. Become one with the lost." Terror surged through him. In a burst of adrenaline and instinct, he turned and ran, his footsteps echoing wildly as he dashed back up the stairs toward the faint promise of the surface. The oppressive pull of the spectral realm clawed at his back, and the whispers of the deceased seemed to hound his every step. In the dim corridor, the ticking of the ancient timepiece pounded in his ears like a death knell, urging him to surrender to the inexorable passage of fate. As he clambered upward, the heavy weight of unseen forces bore down upon him. The tunnel walls pulsed as if alive, and spectral hands brushed against his shoulders, as though pleading for rescue or warning him away. With every labored step, the boundary between nightmare and reality blurred further. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he burst through a narrow exit into the cool night air. The city lights shone like distant beacons of hope, and the sounds of urban life, the distant hum of traffic, the murmur of voices, assumed a normalcy that felt almost alien compared to the horrors he had witnessed below. Gasping for breath, drenched in sweat and cold fear, Adrian staggered into the night. He clutched his recorder and notebook as if they were talismans against the dark. Behind him, the service door sagged into silence once more, sealing the horrors of the abandoned station away from the waking world. He did not dare look back. In the following days, Adrian recounted every detail of what he had seen in meticulous notes. The recordings on his device, though crackling with static and punctuated by eerie echoes, captured fragments of the ghostly voices. A chorus of lamentations and desperate warnings that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Despite his efforts, the experience had irreparably scarred his reality. At night, the same whispers that had called him to the underground would seep into his dreams, and the spectral chime of that ancient timepiece would ring out in the silence of his sleep. Adrian's report became an urban legend in its own right, a haunting account of a place where the lost roamed free, and the Midnight Line continued its eternal journey through the echoes of time. Few believed his story entirely, dismissing it as the fevered imaginings of a man touched by darkness. Yet those who had once worked in the transit system, or who remembered the strange occurrences of Halloween in 1978, would exchange knowing glances and murmured warnings when the topic arose. For Adrian himself, the memory of that night never faded. Every so often, when the city's neon lights dimmed and the urban clamor softened into a hush, he would catch a glimpse of a shadow or hear that low, haunting chime in the distance, a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. And on the rare nights when the wind whispered through the deserted streets and the echoes of the past stirred in the hidden depths beneath the pavement, Adrian would wonder if the ghosts of the lost track were still calling, waiting patiently for the next soul daring enough to venture into the darkness below.